amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The paupers see this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Whew, the season finale of Rogue Ways is upon us. Episode 33 of Season 3. What an auspicious episode it is. This season we've seen guests such as James True, Curtis Kallenbach, Nathan Stoltman of Lift the Veil, Jaren from Jarenism, Jamie Deluxe, Gary Wayne, Sophia Smallstorm, Mark Devlin, Russian Vids, Amanda Volmer, Sherry Sweeney, Steve Poikonon of Slow News Day, Dr. Daryl Hamamoto, Indra Rinsler, Frank Albo, Santos Bonacci, Kyle Washington, Eric Dollard, Marty Leeds, Michael Wan, and of course, my two guests tonight return to wrap up what has already proven an incredible season so far. We hope to bring you a meeting of minds and convergence of somewhat opposing understandings regarding viruses and their transmission. Germ and Terrain theories face off against a host of alternatives in this friendliest of academic ventures. And to help us out, we have Dr. Andrew Kaufman here as a longtime academic receiving degrees in science and medicine from both MIT and Duke universities, a fabulous practitioner of healing arts in the realm of psychiatry and natural healing methods, an inventor of medical devices, and a researcher of top-notch status, but most importantly, a man with a heart and character that leads him where not many would dare to venture. Andy, thank you so much for returning to Rogue Ways tonight. It's excellent to have you. Perfect. And to round us out to perfection, we are also lucky to welcome back Phoenix Aurelius, a skeptic and logician of the highest order, a thinker and researcher working to further the human race's abilities and understandings for all of posterity, a master alchemist applying methodology and epistemology from the vein of Paracelsus, a crafter of spagyric medicines and remedies, an astrologer, and an intrinsic data field therapist utilizing radionics to maximize potential in all of these areas of inquiry. Phoenix, thank you immensely for coming back again tonight to the show. I'm just glad we made it here. I don't know if everybody knows, but we're a couple minutes late, and that is because audio issues suddenly struck, even though we've had so much testing all day today and all day yesterday. I tested to make sure that we could make this happen, and of course, you know, that's not how it worked out, but I'm just so glad that it's working, and I'm so glad that you're both here. And I usually start with a pointless question of the episode, so I wanted to keep that going. And this is a kind of weird and random question that you may have to think on for a moment, but I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts on when, if ever, it is worth it to force something into existence if it isn't just sort of easy for it to emerge and sort of come together. Like, how hard should you push, or in which circumstances should you push through great resistance? Is it ever worth it? Yeah, it's funny that we just did it. It's a good point. Yeah. I just sometimes think if it doesn't come together easily, maybe it wasn't meant to be. And other times I think, should you ever really just give up, though? So it's like a balance. I'm not sure where to find that middle line for. Oh, they're saying that they can't hear you. Everyone. Let me try something. This is because the audio issues we just had that I changed everything. So, let me see something.
Here's us.
Yeah, we have to choose one. Let's see if that worked.
Okay, testing.
So I just changed something. If you guys in the audience can chat on YouTube and tell me if you can hear them now. You can now? Okay, I think that we can hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can still hear you too. So if all of those things are in line, we're good.
All right.
Whew, okay. Well, they didn't really hear much except for you guys saying that we just did fight through those forcing things into existence, and then we continued that process. So
well, no, this makes me think of a lesson that I'm always trying to teach the kids, actually. Like, it's with mechanical objects, right? Like, you need to put back a screw or get something off or open up a package, right? And so I always say, don't force it. Like you have to fiddle with it till you find the secret way to get it undone or redone or whatever, right? And so I think that applies to many situations, that there's perhaps a key under the doormat, but you have to look there first.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy because that kind of fits perfectly with what I was trying to find, I think, where you maybe shouldn't like push right through the middle of it, but you can maybe find a way around sort of, or find a way over.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's get started. So I was hoping that maybe Andy, you wanted to provide us with a sort of quick summary of your ideas about germ theory and terrain theory and how they kind of clash maybe, and like where you've come to with that. Just as a reminder, I think a lot of people listening are probably pretty up on that, whole philosophy, but just as a quick intro, maybe.
Yeah, sure. And, I think this was one of the most difficult things for me to really grasp, because the, germ theory dogma is so like deeply ingrained into us from, early childhood. But essentially what they do is they have a different view of the germ. And, germ actually means a new growth or bud. And so applying it to the germ theory turns it into something that's dangerous and invades us and causes disease. And, part of this, like this theory probably existed for quite a while, maybe before they observed a lot of pathology, but they were looking at people who were sick with certain diseases, and they observed bacteria present at the site of disease. But they made an assumption that it was the, cause of the disease. So terrain theory takes kind of a very different view, that the bacteria or other microorganisms simply are there to decompose and decay any, dead, rotting, or diseased matter, and serve like that kind of recycling, restoration role, just as we observe them in other areas of nature, like in the forest. For example, right, when we see the microorganisms consuming a fallen log, right, as one example. And so terrain theory basically says that the terrain or the environment or the ecosystem of the body, the tissues of the body actually have the disease caused by, some factor, a toxin, a malnourishment, something like that. And then after that disease is arrested, then the microorganisms come in to clean up and decompose the area. And so essentially that's the sort of comparison of the two in a nutshell.
Excellent. Well said. And Phoenix, do you want to comment on any of that?
Well, yeah, especially after chatting with Andy privately, I think last week or so, I came to the pretty much the same conclusion that, germ theory, or at least as it pertains to viruses in particular, really doesn't have very good or very solid science behind it. And so for me, I think that terrain theory, germ theory, all of these are theories because they haven't been proven, even if they have a great deal of evidence to support some of their claims or some of the theories behind it. I think that there's still a deeper level that we can go and perform much more investigation, perform possibly more objective perspectives or achieve more objective perspectives in what is happening when people get sick. Because one thing that, I think all of us have probably been around somebody with the flu. Some of us then get the flu. Why is that if germ theory doesn't hold up? And at the same time, I can't deny any of the tenets that have been stated about terrain theory either. And I don't know that I sit in either camp. Yeah. This is kind of the bane of my existence, though, is that I always dip a toe into every lake and check the water and get into the most comfortable lakes to swim in, so to speak. And so that's pretty much what I'll be doing here tonight as well.
Yeah. I like that, the spirit of exploration, because it is hard to settle on something when, there's a lot of correlative data, which is maybe what led us kind of astray, is just jumping into some of that correlative data and not all of it. And we want to keep our minds open to keep going to see what happens. And I have this tendency to feel like there's somewhere in the middle that's always true. But it is interesting when Andy, you're talking about the microorganisms that come in to sort of help, and looking at those as though they're like the enemy and causing the illness when really they're sort of assisting it along. I think that's really important to note for people who are sort of like, no, I know that bacteria or whatever exists, and so maybe you can, they can think of it that way, and I think more will come out as we chat. And I wonder.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
if I could just add something, Lindsay, because over the past 10 or so years, like I think most people are familiar with what's called the microbiome, right, or our gut biome, or the gut microbes, right? A lot of different names for it, but they're actually not just in our gut; they're throughout our entire body. Actually, they actually generate from our own cells, but that's another interesting thing to talk about.
Wow.
But so we know these things are important for health, and in fact they're actually vital for our survival. Like if we're stripped of all those microorganisms, we can't keep living, right? So it's like it takes time to shift this thinking, right? Just like this is really new information for Phoenix based on our discussion, and for me, it took me like years of study before I was willing to like challenge this like deep ingrained theory. So it takes time and like evolution, but the important thing is like, just like I've changed my opinion about various aspects related to the virus over time as I uncover new information, is that we all like remain open to looking at things a different way, and that's really the true nature of science. It's always question the current paradigm or the current theory, and if you try really, really hard and can't disprove it, then maybe it's true.
Yes. I definitely love that approach, and I encourage everyone listening and thinking about these things to think about it that way of like, well, as far as I know, so far, here's what seems to be true. Who knows if there's more that I can take in to sort of expand that. And I know that Phoenix, you were challenged recently with coming to terms with peer-reviewed research and having new understandings about that. So maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Andy had put out some information being like, hey, anybody who wants to say that I'm wrong, you better supply me with some studies that show that viruses at least have been isolated and show the correlation to the disease if you can. So I tried. Would you say that I even put in a fair attempt at that, Andy?
Well, no, you like an order of magnitude higher than anyone else who contacted me.
Much further beyond fair.
So as a researcher, I compile literally thousands of points of data, and I'm constantly reading through peer-reviewed literature. And in all of the peer-reviewed literature that I could come across talking about various viruses, both in equestrian samples as well as in human samples, because especially with respiratory viruses and coronaviruses and influenza viruses, they appear a lot in equestrian literature as well. So I was constantly coming up with the concept that they would say, and include a methodology, here's how we isolated the virus. And Andy, he definitely took some really good time with me. Like I appreciate it like crazy, because he took the methodology and he said, let's just discuss this paper that you sent me and discuss the methodology. And so if I might recapitulate that, it looked like this. Yeah. For COVID-19 in particular, or the virus known as SARS-CoV-2, what they would do is they would take some orthopharyngeal swabs or nasopharyngeal swabs in through the nose or the mouth and to the back of the throat, or as much as they could, and try and get a sample of that person's mucus and cells. Already at this point, I just want to point out that Andy told me, okay, so now we're definitely going to have bacteria, because we just talked about the microbiome, okay? You have hundreds of different types of bacteria in your mouth, Streptococcus mutans, tons of different types of bacteria exist inside of the mouth. And so you're going to have bacterial cells, you're going to have human cells. And then what they do is they take that culture, and to the best of my memory, they basically inoculate that into vero cells, and these were vero cells of simian origin. Is that right, Andy? That they were
monkey kidney, yeah.
Yeah. And then there were a whole host of other different types of cells that some of them belong to birds, some to rats, some to other animals, and they put all of those cells together. Then they injected all of those cells or suspended all of those cells into bovine serum, and then they treated with an antibiotic and then an antifungal. And then they used what would you call it? An anti-clumping agent, essentially. How do you call that, Andy?
Yeah, anti-clotting agent.
An anti-clotting agent, exactly. Which, as he pointed out to me, already indicates that the cells have inflammation, which indicates that there's some disease happening or some sort of inflammatory response. And then after that, centrifuging, and then using PCR after that to amplify. And, you know, Andy has talked in length in other interviews that he's done about how the PCR is performed, and amplifying that, and then coming to a couple of different RNA or DNA conclusions, and then saying that that must be the virus after coming up with, you know, maybe 10 to 15% of that RNA, and then drawing the rest from a library sample or multiple different library samples, meaning that they try and fill in what they don't know with all of this erroneous data, really. And so as basic synopsis, this is essentially what I perceived as being the method that was used for the particular study that I sent him that we diagrammed out. Does that sound about right to you too, Andy?
Yeah, and it's you know, almost identical to all of the other studies. I mean, that one was genome heavy, but yeah, these libraries that you were mentioning, where they get the sequences from, those are all from other viruses that they sequenced in the same exact manner. So, like, according to Dr. Lanka, Stefan Lanka, he said they basically, when they started researching and found bacteriophages, which are like viruses that are in bacterial cultures that they can induce in a laboratory. So those, they have no problem purifying and isolating them. And what they did is they took some intact genetic sequences from those phages, and that was the first sequences they put in these libraries. And when they were then had these other particles that who knows what they were, that they were doing the kind of tests like Phoenix described, they would make probes from those sequences, like that they're related somehow, and then use those probes to find strands of, you know, 150 to 250 base pairs, and piece those together as best they could, and then go back to the library to find the missing sequences that had some homology on both ends that they could piecemeal in together, like kind of like they had a jigsaw puzzle that was missing a bunch of pieces. And so they just like had some construction paper and cut them out, you know, of that, or they had a sticker book and they found the sticker shapes that matched and then put them in there. And that's like how they constructed it. And then each time they constructed a new one in that way, then that sequence became part of the database, and this grew over time. And so it's like a recipe. You could sequence a genome of a virus, and like pretty much it seems like they're making it up from any bodily sample, you know, through this technique. So, you know, once actually, you know, Stefan really helped me understand how this process works exactly. And I'm still studying it to get, you know, the more details about it, you know, so I could describe it in more specific detail. But it's just totally astonishing. It's kind of like a Frankenstein genome.
It sounds like it's just a like mishmash of random, you know, as many random objects as they can find in like a bag, and they're just reaching in and being like, see, I found a piece in here. And it's like, well, this is a logical fallacy called not a cause for a cause, right? Just because you found this random thing after all these steps and processes, it does not mean that this thing is the thing that caused the original thing way back when, you know? It's very far removed from the source and very jumbled with lots of data, it sounds like, if I'm following correctly.
A lot of different genes go into that. Like we were talking about bacterial genes, the human genes of the sample that, you know, from whence the sample originated, plus the cells and the genes that are going, you know, all of the DNA from all of the different sources that are going into that.
Yeah.
How can you say that realistically you've isolated the DNA from just one thing? It's, you know, and this is exactly just like Andy at the beginning of this episode talked about germ actually being kind of a flip-flop in medical terminology, where they use a term and then they throw in a double blind. Now, I'm very familiar with double blinds because esoteric literature is actually filled full of it. In fact, you can't actually read something straightforward in any alchemical text and assume that that's what they're actually talking about. You have to be able to reference thousands of other points and know that when they're talking about something, they may actually be using the exact opposite of what they're talking about. in order to kind of throw the scent off the trail for in the esoteric world, the uninitiated, or for those who really don't know their head from their ass. And it seems like the medical world has not really changed that much in 600 to 700 years. In fact, the same problems that Paracelsus was talking about in the late 1400s and early 1500s are the exact same things that we have going on today. And this concept of double blinds is really, it's just an extenuation, I think, of a much older tradition. So to call something an isolate was the first thing that I realized when we went through that process. I was like, well, I don't agree that this is good science. And Andy was like, okay, yeah, well, now you're in my camp.
It's not good science. It's not good logic. You know, if you're just thinking about it logically, it's illogical, which makes it's weird to me because I expect science to be at least very logical, if not maybe make some mistakes here and there. But it's like they're starting with a horrible way of thinking in the first place. It's not clear at all. And then I wonder, like, what is their motivation? Do you think this is intentional, or do you think these people have the best of, you know, intentions and that they're just kind of led astray, or a little bit of both? Or what do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I think they're pretty much indoctrinated, right? They're pre-selected. They want to learn virology and become, you know, discover new viruses, right, that maybe cause disease, right? There's lots of, you know, movies about it and, you know, novels and such. And when they, you know, start studying there, they learn this technique, right, where you basically take the source of the whatever you think is the virus and you mix it with a bunch of other stuff, and you know you're going to get this result. It's like a proven recipe. So you do this, you know, maybe you assist someone in grad school, and then you get your name on the paper and you see, oh wow, this is pretty straightforward. And then, you know, then you're a postdoc, and you know, then you have an opportunity. Now you're the lead author or something, and then that gets you a job or a grant, right? Because you've proven that you can identify viruses or sequence virus genomes. And so since you know, you got a good thing going there, it's like, why would you question it? Because you already believed it anyway. It's like, you know, how many even of us, right, would really be questioning this if it wasn't for the pandemic?
Yeah.
Right? Like, we have a real important reason to look at this dogma now. But, you know, 12 months ago, we didn't have that impetus. So, you know, and of course, you know, for someone who's a scientist like that now, it's even like one of the, a time that you wouldn't really consider questioning at all, because it's like your heyday, right? Like, you're the expert, like this is what you thought might happen, right? Because they talked about it at every virus conference around the world, right? Like, it's, you know, I mean, we probably all agree that it's been planned, but I think someone could look at it and say, oh, well, it's just like, you know, they've been warning about this forever, right? And now it's here, kind of thing. So, you know, it's like that's their whole existence. And, you know, why would you question that? It's the same thing if you're a physician, you know, why would you question pharmaceuticals? It's right. You've always been told, even though you can see, you know, in your own observation, what it's that it's not really curing anybody of any illness.
Yeah. And speaking of that, pharmaceuticals not curing anybody of anything, and basically, I think most of sort of Western allopathic medicine doesn't really cure anything, and just often sort of masks some symptoms a bit for a while so that you can like be just well enough to go about your day or something. But maybe Phoenix can elaborate on some of the medical practices that have proven successful despite that they don't have this understanding of germ theory, and that's not how they view the world.
Well, you know, let me just go back really fast, and then I'll touch upon this. To elaborate on what Andy said, you know, I'm very, very heavily influenced by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and by the logic or deductive logic that Holmes would use. And in those books of Sherlock Holmes, you're constantly going back to the logic that no matter how insane a theory might be, when you deduct all of the other things that can't be, and you're just left with what the answer actually is. And so for me, the thing that we can deduct time and time again are, is it effective? Is it, blah, blah, blah. There's still no cure for the common cold, which, there are numerous different viruses that are attributed to the common cold. You have influenza viruses, you have rhinoviruses, you have reoviruses, you have adenoviruses, you have coronaviruses, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these are attributed to the cold, but now I want you to think about every different cold medication or influenza medication, even over the counter, that exists. So we're talking like Tamiflu, we're talking even things that don't necessarily work, that are meant for like allergies and histamine responses, for instance, like Sudafed, so on and so forth. All of these things are being produced in addition to pharmaceutical or pharmacologically formulated vaccinations. And vaccines don't really make a whole lot of money, but well, it's debatable on how you take a look at that. I would say that the conglomeration of all the vaccines that a person may get within their lifetime, that makes a lot of money, but they're not high sale items. For instance, when you go to, CVS or whatever, and you see these dumbass signs that are saying, get your flu shot today, $15. That's not a high price ticket item in comparison to, say, a prescription for morphine or other things like that that are also pharmacologically formulated inside of labs using iatrochemical technology. But what we are seeing is enormous quote unquote supplement or over the counter medications that are constantly being peddled out, and those are also not very high price ticket items, but they are administered in a far greater level and in much greater amplitude than what you would see vaccines. For instance, I used to work for Reckitt Benckiser, and I was overseeing their gummy formulation of Airborne at the time. Reckitt Benckiser also makes Mucinex. Mucinex, commonly used for the cold, right? That is such a huge, in the nutraceutical realm, that is such a huge moneymaker for them. That product, I mean, you see commercials about it. I mean, they are promoting that like crazy. It makes a lot of money. And so for me, the answer of why are they perpetuating this, even when there's not sound science behind it, is not just what Andy was talking about, which definitely has a part to play in it. It goes hand in hand with the prestige of being a doctor, of publishing papers, of being in peer-reviewed journals, and so on and so forth. But it comes down specifically to the lucrativity of Rockefeller-based medicine. And so that would be my answer for why is this allowed to perpetuate, is because if they don't, then they just literally lost out on $1 billion nutraceutical market where the majority of these things are made in order to treat the symptoms of things that are attributed to viruses.
It's a really good point, and I'm glad you went back to mention that, because it's really important. And I do think it's a combination of both those things for sure that is motivating people. And in some sense, I have to point out the sort of, I don't know really how to say it, but it's like there has to be some sort of lack inside of yourself for you to be able to do those things, I think, because at some level, I think you kind of see, especially let's like take Tylenol, for example. Tylenol kills tons of people every year, and no one ever talks about it or cares, and the makers of Tylenol keep making Tylenol, and who knows, we could like debate that if that's good or not. But I think if you didn't have inside of yourself something that needed sort of attention or praise or to like control a multi-billion-dollar corporation or whatever, and you were sort of a healthy whole person, that would remove those motivations sort of weight in your life and your ability to choose those things. So there's something really personal failings going on at many levels and many people to allow all this to go forth, I think, too. But
good
yeah.
point.
So let's talk about the alternative medical practices that, like we said, don't have anything like germ theory in their sort of philosophy, and yet are very, very effective.
Right. So I have a really great friend. Her name is Jen Onizer, very talented traditional Chinese medicine doctor. Chinese medicine has absolutely nothing to do with germ theory. They have dealt with the symptoms of viral conditions, or what are now attributed to viral conditions, for hundreds and hundreds, and well, I mean, arguably 3,500 years. So lots of hundreds of years. That being said, she and I are constantly rapping about like how stupid it is that Westerners are completely tapped up into what are, you know, the symptoms and how to treat this, how to just basically treat the symptoms, don't eliminate the root cause. Whereas Chinese medicine would try and find the elemental imbalances. Now, they have a very comprehensive system, of course, of acupuncture, acupressure points. And each of these acupuncture, acupressure points correspond to one or more lines in the body, an acupressure line or acupuncture line. And each of these corresponds to one of the 5 elements. And each of the elements has qualities to it. So for instance, if something is too cold and too moist, then that might be an imbalance of earth, or it might be an imbalance of water, depending on the nature of the condition. And so they would search and not only take the pulses, but take a look at the tongue, try and find other indications of what those imbalances are, and create a customized medicinal approach specifically for that patient. And a good Chinese practitioner or Chinese doctor will never use the same protocol over and over and over for clients who have the same condition, knowing that every person is inherently different in their constitution. And so they will constantly create what we could refer to in the West as personalized medicine. And that's been going on for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, depending on which source you take a look at. And they're successfully treating it. And Jen has talked with me. She's a doctor, and so she has the ability to use terms like treat. And she has successfully treated multiple individuals who show COVID symptoms and been able to eliminate those as well. Anthroposophical medicine is another really great point. That this was more or less created by Rudolf Steiner, who himself was not a medical doctor, but did talk to and give lectures to medical doctors, just like he wasn't necessarily a farmer, and he created the entire corpus of biodynamic practices, biodynamic agriculture. He was just more or less an amazing savant. He knew a ton about a ton of different things, encyclopedic knowledge, and he worked very heavily with the esoteric and the occult. And one of the things that he brought out about anthroposophic medicine, because he was pressed in his time about viruses. Okay, the Spanish flu had already happened by the time he was giving certain presentations. In fact, what is the name? He used the term neurasthenia. Yeah, there we go. Neurasthenia was the term that he used, and he said that viruses actually, there may be an element of contagion to them, but it's not in the way that modern Western doctors were talking about. He said that the body actually contains mirror neurons, or he suggested to this. Modern people like the Jalisco Institute have kind of talked about this, where the brain contains mirror neurons. And it's where you might see something in another individual, and your neurons pick it up and end up mirroring that. So like, for instance, he used the example in one of his lectures about you walk into a situation where somebody is crying or they're really sad. And then the person who is observing that sad person might also become sad. Is that because of a germ? Was there a bacteria or a virus or a parasite that was passed from person to person that caused the sadness? Most likely not. So he used the concept of talking about mirror neurons to be able to explain this. And just for those who don't know, a mirror neuron is a neuron that fires when a person acts and when the person observes the same action performed by another. So the neuron mirrors the behavior of the other person as though the observer were itself acting. And this is how mirror neurons work. So Steiner talked about viruses originating on the cell level, which is not that much different than what Andy's talking about with terrain theory, and that there might be elements of nervous system neurasthenia, is what he would call it, that are responsible for that. And a lot of doctors of this particular branch of medicine, anthroposophical medicine, use lots of different things. They use supplements and remedies and nutrition and eurythmy as well. Eurythmy is a type of movement-based therapy, and so there are different movements that can be made that are meant to, like for instance, you can say an entire poem through movements. That's one of the things of eurythmy. And this is often taught in Waldorf education still today. But they will prescribe certain movements, and then also meditation is the fourth pillar of anthroposophical medicine. And so they will use certain meditations and eurythmy supplements and nutrition and lifestyle, like exercise and lifestyle, in order to be able to treat diseases. And there have been a lot of people who have been treated this way. Ayurveda works very similar to Chinese medicine, and I know various Ayurvedic practitioners who have a great deal of success. Of course, things like ashwagandha are part of the Ayurvedic corpus of medicine, the pharmacopoeia of Ayurveda, and that works really well at boosting the immune system, preventing and treating diseases and what we consider to be viral conditions, but they have no viruses at all. And of course, my own research with Spagyria and IDF work suggests that there are multiple different approaches that can be taken. With Spagyria, of course, it's much more elaborate, and you have to take into account the constitution of the individual, and it's highly personalized. With IDF, I have found multiple different approaches, and I come prepared to this talk with 20 different case studies that we can point out of people who have been tested, some of which are positive and asymptomatic, some of which are positive and symptomatic, some of which are negative, asymptomatic, and some of which are negative and symptomatic.
Wow.
In order to be able to discuss what those numbers look like from an IDF perspective, and what my data and my research suggests in possible solution options from approaching it exclusively from IDF. And for those who are listening who don't understand what IDF means, it means intrinsic data field. And it's basically a way of interfacing with what we feel is the same thing as Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field. Or morphogenetic field, and it goes into the energetic body of the individual and analyzes multiple different layers of that energetic anatomy. Dr. Richard Gerber also wrote a book called Vibrational Medicine, where he discusses radionics. In there, radionics would be another term for IDF technology. So yeah, there's a lot tied up in there into the vibrational component and what we're looking for in the vibrational body. And there may be, this is a big part of my research, a big discrepancy between what shows up in the intrinsic data field of an individual and what shows up in their physiology or the physiological body of an individual, knowing that there are multiple different layers to the subtle and corporal anatomy of an individual. So these are just some of the thoughts that I've had about contagion, and that it doesn't need to even be conceptualized in order to properly address either the symptoms and or the root cause. So
I love that it doesn't need to be conceptualized in order to address the cause. That's a beautiful thing in and of itself, and we can take that anywhere. But I also love that possibility of the transmission, because that's one of my main questions when we come up against this. I'm like, okay, so how does transmission occur then if we don't have viruses, and what is this? And one is that the terrain around you is poisoned somehow, like the fish tank is dirty, clean the water. And the other is this, what you're saying, I think the mirror neurons. And I don't know if this is the same, but like a lot of times someone near me will be in pain and I will start having that same pain in my body. Is that like a mirror neuron thing?
Absolutely. It extends into lots of different other areas. Like, for instance, Noriana, my partner, has a huge background in dance and movement therapy and somatics and things like that. And there's oh God, I forget the name of it. It's something like authentic witnessing or something like that. It's basically where one person moves and just engages in movement, and then another person just objectively watches them and tries not to really form any sort of opinion about what it is that they're doing, and just allows that movement to impress upon them. And then they talk about, maybe it's just called authentic movement. I think that's what it's called. And then they talk about what it is that they felt during the time that was happening. And oftentimes, like very, very frequently, like probably 85% plus of the time, people who were feeling one way while moving and not talking were able to transmit exactly the emotion to the witness, as long as the witness was able to observe without trying to go into judgment or form opinions about it. And they get that same type of thing. So mirror neurons work very much so that same way, and they're tied very deeply into somatic understanding.
Awesome. And Andy, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to all of that. That was a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that I didn't know Steiner is the one who came up with the idea for mirror neurons, because I think that later led to a Nobel Prize when they were actually discovered in the neuroanatomy. So that's quite an interesting prediction, but I guess he was ahead of his time in many ways. I think the kind of natural healing that I often talk about and teach about is probably most closely related to the anthroposophical paradigm, and it's basically I look at usually the cause of disease is just a few things. It's toxicity or malnourishment or psychological shock, or some other form of toxin like ionizing or EMF radiation, and then rarely a genetic anomaly. But many times those can also be treated successfully by modifying the environment, and that's really kind of a way to look at what we're doing, is just like modifying the terrain or the environment inside the body that allows it to go through its own healing process. Because I think of the body as having tremendous wisdom, and I believe that it comes from the sort of the source, the collective consciousness source, the all, and provides all the intelligence, because the capacity of our body to manage all of the processes and intelligence is not really possible, right? So it's really just giving the basic conditions that the body needs to do its thing, and everything falls into line. And there's always more than one way, probably more than 5 ways, right, through different natural methods to achieve this and allow the body to restore itself to harmony and health. And so that's one of the brilliant things about this, because even if you just look at plants and botanicals, right, like Phoenix mentioned ashwagandha, but if you go to different regions around the world, in every region you'll find in that ecosystem plants that have similar healing processes, right, to plants in other areas. Like if you just think about essential oils in this respect, right, for many of the uses clinically for an essential oil, you can simply find the one that's prevalent in your geographic area, and chances are it'll be therapeutic for you. And if you're in a different continent, you can use their local one and it will likely work just as well. So it's like almost as nature has built in this redundancy to really, promote our own health, which is really kind of, magical, and like a privilege for us to, be in that environment and be able to take advantage of this. And, it's really unfortunate that through the Rockefeller medicine business model, right, that all of this has been really subverted. And in fact, many things that could be very helpful are even illegal. In many ways, right? Like there was somebody I had mentioned, I think I did a show about detoxification, and I mentioned bentonite clay. So someone from Canada reached out to me, and they said they went to their local health store and asked, because I said specifically make sure it's food grade, right? Because there could be too much arsenic or other heavy metals in there. And so she asked for that, and the manager came over and said it's illegal to ingest bentonite clay in Canada.
What?
Yeah.
There's always things like this. Like I know when I was fighting pre-cancer, I was taking illegal folate or folic acid or something like that.
Was it like tetrahydrofolic acid or something like that?
I don't remember. I just remember it was hard to find and that I wasn't supposed to be taking it, but I knew that it was going to work, and so I did it anyway.
Oh yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I remember there was a doctor who had some studies on that, and then something happened, right? It got covered up, or.
And we know all of the different aspects of THC and CBDs and all the whatever those are called. I forget the word, but all of those aspects of marijuana that can help us.
Terpenoids.
Oh right, yeah.
And we've got the mycological world that we're not supposed to mess with either, and it's insane. But I think both of you have touched on the psychological aspect, and I know I am, I just was thinking today about this time where I drove. I was on a road trip. I was on like the first day of it, and I ended up in this place I've never been before. It's very, very hot out, and everyone knows now that I have a horrible phobia of moths. And 1 billion moths showed up all of a sudden, like they do at like 5 or 6, and so I had to go get in my van and hide. And there was a bunch in there that I had to scream and kill like by myself in this van. And then I couldn't get out of my van because they were all around outside. And so I spent all night in this overcooked van, dying, from heat and with terror in my mind. And I woke up the next day just so ill. I was so sick, and I'm sure I just created it out of pure overload of stress. So we can make ourselves sick in all these different ways. And
you sure it wasn't a virus from the moths?
Yeah, the moths carried a virus and sprinkled it on me. But I think those we ignore all of that in Western medicine, like you were saying, Andy, and the as well as like nutrition and all of these things. And it's there's a whole world of health we could have if we stopped ignoring those things.
Absolutely. And, actually, if you want to look at the deepest exploration about psychological causes of illness, German new medicine is definitely something worth looking at, which was kind of founded by Dr. Hamer. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but he dealt with the difficult family loss, and stimulated him to do some really intense research. And he basically had this theory about that almost all illness is caused by what's known as conflict shock, which is essentially some kind of psychological conflict.
Yeah.
That would be severe, like territorial conflict or, survival conflict, things like that. And that they would cause a specific illness, and it was all mediated through the brain. And here's the really interesting scientific part, is that he was actually able to show with CT scans specific lesions that were, prior to that, just not really recognized by the radiologists. But since then, they have been validated by several radiologists. And that the location of these lesions, and the lesions always look the same, that by the location, you could tell what organ system, and then it's related to a specific categories of conflict shocks. So they've mapped out this really interesting system. And, it's an area that I was just starting to explore when I had to shift gears into virus research.
Interesting. I've never heard of that before. And I also wanted to touch back again on the idea that nature has sort of provided everything that we need, no matter where we are in the sort of ecosphere, that we can, and it's almost like it was planned. And it's at least very much, like you were saying, a beautiful and magical thing. But Phoenix, unless you have something you want to comment on.
I actually want to comment a little bit on the things that are found in the ecosphere. Okay. I mean, today we're dealing with tons of different diseases. Most of the diseases that people are dealing with, regardless of whether they're considered to have a viral origin or not by, Rockefeller medicine institutions, the cures for them are largely found in their yard, if they let their yard go more or less wild.
Like
and this is something that Andy was kind of talking about in herbalism, especially in what I could call like modern age or maybe even new age herbalism. The idea is rampant that the things that you need are no more than a mile away from you. And typically they're found in your own front yard. So like tons of people are addicted to opiates, okay? And opium, even heroin, so on and so forth. The interesting thing about the pain, which is oftentimes either psychological or otherwise, that is being generated, is that if they were to go right outside into their yard, if they weren't to poison their yards and use weed and feed and all this other erroneous stuff, they would find Lactuca virosa, or wild opium lettuce, in their yard. And it doesn't actually contain an opiate, but it's able to ooze a latex, just like all lettuces, thus the name of it being a classification of a lettuce. And when you boil that down, you can create a pitch of it, and it is smokable, but it's better if it's ingested either through a tincture form or through a pure aqueous extract that gets made by boiling down the fresh material and reducing it to a pitch or a tar. And that material works equally as well. It induces sleep. It gets rid of a lot of different pains. In fact, in multiple different times with my clients, I have taught them how to make this. And just taught them how to let it grow wild and to harvest it in their yard, because you don't need much more than what's already there. It's a very, very potent medicine. And in fact, I can't remember which one. I'd have to look this up. But one of the Roman emperors actually attributed his healing to some sort of crazy disease that he had to wild opium lettuce. And it was one of his physicians that actually cured him and brought it into the forefront of the Western pharmacopoeia as a result of it healing him. It might be Tiberius, Emperor Tiberius. I'm not certain of that, though. So, but yeah, at any rate, all of these things are around us. Same thing with dandelions, all over in the yard. There's great liver medicine. They can also stimulate the kidneys. That you can administer them in multiple different ways. And here's one thing that I've learned is that every different method of ingestion of a particular plant directs it to a different area. So for instance, MCT is something that allegedly, according to multiple studies, is able to break the blood-brain barrier. If any of the medicinal properties of a plant are soluble in MCT oil and you need to get it to the brain in particular, one of the best ways of doing it is by doing an MCT infusion and then taking that oil internally. And then that breaks the blood-brain barrier and delivers it directly to the brain. If you need it to go to the liver, then maybe something like ghee or coconut oil would be good, because fats also get processed by the liver, or taking it in an electuary or a syrup, something that's sweet that also is going to be stored into the liver, or if you have pancreatic disease, especially or even spleen disorders, because in Chinese medicine, the spleen is tonified by the taste sweet. And so all of these things are potent delivery methods. If you need something blood soluble, then perhaps performing a high ethanol tincture or a mild aqueous dilution of a hydroethanol tincture, which means water and ethanol together, kind of tincture, or an extract. If you need it in the digestive system, an extract, or just eating the plant raw, all of these different ways of ingesting the plant takes what is considered to be the nutritive or healing values of that material and puts it into an area that can direct it directly where it needs to go for the individual themselves. And in this way, I found that one plant oftentimes is like its own pharmacopoeia if a person just simply learns to work with it. And that's not even touching upon multiple different types of extractions that I can teach people in the realm of spagyria that also isolate the soul, the spirit, and the body, and have different proportions and amounts of that, so that the soul working with the mind, the spirit working with the breath and with the kind of rhythmic functions of the body, and the body itself working with the cells, the structure, the joints, the bones, ligaments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's just one thing I wanted to talk about there, is one plant becomes its entire pharmacopoeia.
Wow. I can mention that if people are like kind of on the go and they want dandelion in their body and their diet, I just found Dandy Blend and I replaced my coffee with it, and it's amazing and I love it. Everybody should try it.
Well, I think the next fad is definitely going to be wild opium lettuce now.
Yeah.
You let the cat out of the bag there, Phoenix.
You know what? Great. If that stops people from spraying their damn lawns, then that's great. But people really need to be listening to other physicians like Dr. Zach Bush and stuff, who bring topics like these to the forefront and include agriculture as one of the mainstays of modern medicine. Because if the food that you're eating is nutrient depleted or has traces of toxins or carcinogens or other things in it, then that's not going to help with, regardless of what theory you're working with, contagion theory or terrain theory. And in fact, it would actually stand to reason that a lot of the contagious, quote unquote, conditions that we have, if they are actually due to concepts pertaining to terrain theory and not contagions at all, actually stem from these types of poisons. And if people will stop spraying their lawns and harvest the things that are around them, that's the best thing. I don't care if they're using opium lettuce or not.
Absolutely. And just I remember it had to be late 90s or early 2000s when I started noticing that, fruit tasted not as good. Food, like the produce didn't taste as good, and something was happening. And then I learned about GMOs. And I was like, wow, they're literally like taking the nutrition out of these things, whatever process they're using. Because I think that's right. Am I wrong to think that the flavor of it has something to do with the nutritional density of it?
In most philosophies, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you can taste the difference. And if you grow it yourself or you find it wild in your lawn, I'm sure that it's a lot more dense than some of the stuff that you're going to buy in the store. And it's free.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
well, let's, I guess, get into Phoenix. Maybe you can explain to us the evidences of viruses existing only in the subtle energy form. So they're not actually these little living beings that kind of invade and populate us, that there's something going on in the energetic balance or world that is better representing what they actually are.
Yeah, I would love to. In fact, this was always something that I struggled with the peer review science that did exist, because they said that they could show it as RNA or DNA sequences. And the only way that that really made any sense to me, based on my findings, as well as in spagyric theory. Okay, so Paracelsus, 1500s, I mean, every different form of modern medicine, whether it's German new medicine, homeopathy, if it comes from the West, herbalism, modern allopathy, all of these actually branch directly out of Paracelsian thought, every single one of them. So Paracelsus, being the founder of spagyric medicine, he included that there were 5 causes of disease. There's ens astrale, the cause of disease due to the stars. And I'm a bit of an apologist, I suppose, these days, because I'm taking what I know about science today, and also putting these into the categories that Paracelsus created 500 plus years ago. Okay, so in that way, I guess you'd have to call me by definition an apologist, but realistically, ens astrale would be things that create fluctuations in the electromagnetism or the magnetospheric realms that alter our body. So for instance, just on a very base level, we know that the nervous system and the endocrine system are largely electrical or electrochemical in nature, meaning that electromagnetism at least accounts for about half of the functionality of these systems of the body. In that way, if there are magnetic fluctuations in the planet, either by, say, solar flares or by pressure, for instance, barometric pressure, or by lots of different types of things, this is going to change the way that something behaves. Now, in the laboratory, I can even prove that, especially with barometric pressure, or, I'm constantly split testing things that are made under this particular type of astronomical influence as opposed to under this astronomical influence. I make wine too, and mead and beer, and things that are made routinely 3 days before the full moon and started with their fermentation. They ferment faster, more vigorously, etc., regardless of the constellation that the moon is in at that time. Now, I use sidereal astronomy that lines up with International Astronomical Union data. I don't use tropical astrology, which is the prevalent form of astronomy or astrology that gets used by most alchemists even still today. But so ens astrale, first cause of disease. Ens naturale would be the next cause of disease. Ens naturale is basically anything that happens of a natural origin. This could be your environment, this could be the seasons, this could be your parents and their kind of genetics. This could, it's basically a lot of different things. And if terrain theory were to fit in only one category of Paracelsian medicine, it would most closely align to this, although there is some overlap also with the next cause of disease called ens veneni. Ens veneni is the cause of disease due to poisons or toxicity. And Paracelsus was the very first person in the entire Western world, at least in Western medical literature, to point out that disease can actually be caused by an outside source. Before that, in Galenic medicine, the 4 humors of sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and bilious were considered to correspond to the 4 Aristotelian elements. And if those were out of balance internally, then that would cause disease. And that philosophy, Galenic philosophy, is not that much different really than Ayurvedic philosophy or traditional Chinese philosophy in that particular way. There are lots of other differences, but it's not that much different in the constitutional archetyping. So yeah, you have those 3. And then you also have ens spirituale, which is the 4th, the cause of disease due to spirits or spiritual influences. This could be, if there were contagions, which I'm open to entertaining that idea, of course, then this would be the things that act like spirits that move around and can influence human health. And then there's also the last cause of disease, ens dei, or the cause of disease due to God, things that you cannot change or that are tied up with your destiny, tied up with the purpose of your life, what you're meant to go through, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the 5 causes of disease according to Paracelsus. Within that, I would always read the peer-reviewed literature and take a look from a spagyric perspective at the diseases that are caused by what are modernly most commonly attributed to viruses, and I would have to categorize those as ens spirituale, not necessarily ens veneni, because it's not necessarily a toxin, it's more of an entity or more of a being. Paracelsus also referred to diseases that were of a bacterial nature in most cases because they didn't know about bacteria at that point, or things that we would now call viral diseases. He was able to very successfully cure them, but he conceived of them as ens spirituale, and the way that he would go about treating them would be through various talismans, or through prayers, or through mandalas, or through means that were also spiritual in order to enhance the spiritual fortification of the energy field. So this was always something that I've had to reconcile between modern peer-reviewed literature and my traditional training as a spagyrist, and going maybe more, I don't know actually if this is true, but more than anybody else that I've ever met, I've delved into Paracelsian work and cosmology intensely deeply. There may be some other people out there, but we're few and far between, so the chance that we'd know each other, pretty rare. So I started performing some IDF analysis here. Can I share my screen? No, I'm unable to do so.
Oh, I will allow you to, and then you can. But I want to just jump in really quick and say, on the idea of the sort of spiritual causes of these illnesses, when I believe I had what is now called SARS-CoV-2 in November. And I remember very specifically, and I'd never tried this before with any other illness, but for whatever reason, I was really, really sick. And I felt very sort of oppressed mentally and spiritually, like I was like giving up on life or something. It was very strange, sort of like almost depressive feeling. And so I had this intentional, like I would sit there and sort of almost meditate and be like, I am strong, I am whole, I'm well, and then whatever this is not gonna get me. And I would like do that, and as I would do that, I would feel better, and then I'd start to feel better and be like, cool, and I'd stop and it would start to come back. And so I had to have this like continuous intentional mental sort of state. And so I don't know if that's evidence for the sort of spiritual cause of things, but it's at least an interesting anecdote. And then I want to give Andy a chance to respond to those sort of 5 causes of illness before we get into the IDF analysis.
Sure.
Well, that's kind of a complex system that I really have not been exposed to before, but it encompasses quite a bit of things. And the spiritual aspect is very interesting because when someone is out of balance, right, then that can affect them physically, right, and often, in order for someone to, restore themselves to health, right, they have to put forth effort, right, and take responsibility for doing the things. In our allopathic Western system, it's more passive, right? You go in and you receive treatment, right, and they have to do everything for you. I mean, even in the hospital, right? They'll even wipe your butt for you, right? And so I think that the spiritual aspect is a really key related to health, because it's like, for example, I often talk about the Hermetic principles, and I want to put together like a video on that, how they apply to health. But the law of cause and effect, for example, right, that we, even if we didn't do it knowingly, right, we probably did some behavior that led to our illness, and if we can't recognize that, then we're going to be repeating our mistakes. Right. So we always have to apply this way of thinking, and then we have to be able to take responsibility and try to improve things, and sometimes have some discipline, especially with the eating or not eating or drinking certain things. Right. And so that takes, fortitude and practice, to be able to master these things and tackle them. And then, the part about meditation or contemplation, I do feel that is often a really key aspect of healing. And many times it's just about being able to appreciate your health and your situation and from a different perspective, or get over some struggles or realize what might have been blocking you. And, so it's a key. I mean, there are some times when there is a specific spiritual crisis that needs to be resolved as well. Right. But the more mundane, aspect of being prepared to tackle the physical issues and be responsible for it is, a really big aspect. So I'm always thinking, kind of very holistically. So even though one of those areas may be the primary cause of the person's problems, right, thinking about how can they integrate all of these different aspects, because they all feed and off each other and interact with each other, and sometimes in unpredictable ways as well. So, it's like it does. I mean, I think it really needs to be a very customized thing, right? Which, a lot of, because you were saying earlier on at the beginning, right, that there's sort of this divide in paradigm or philosophy between alternative healers and the allopathic system, but actually there's a lot of a big market segment of the natural healers that really just mimic the same philosophy, like the warfare philosophy of the allopathic system, but instead of using penicillin, they use colloidal silver, or they have their supplement equivalents, but it's like the same strategy. You go to a doctor, you get it like tons of blood tests, right? It's not the typical ones, it's different ones, but it's the same model, sticking a needle and causing trauma to the person, really without a clear purpose, and then sort of selling their own remedies, right? Because it's a great business model, but that doesn't really meet the true needs of the individual the same as having a very customized approach and have them be responsible for carrying it out, right? And even for obtaining the necessary supplies, right? Because that's all part of the process, the preparation work. And I think that's really key. And then when people have the improvement, it's right, they can pat themselves on the back and feel proud and realize also that in the future, they'll be able to also overcome, other health challenges.
Absolutely. That level of empowerment that comes along with that process is incredibly transformative for people. And I kind of look at how far away from any of that most people are, like even changing diet would be like a huge problem, but let alone like going out and harvesting, herbs and starting it on the right day of the moon phase and
Right. Well, you can just, start with filtering your water and drinking more of it,
yes,
and then you can get to harvesting your own opium lettuce, a couple of years down the road.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Baby steps, right? That's awesome focus on the responsibility and the empowerment. And so yeah, Phoenix, what should we look into? You can share your screen now, I think.
Okay, let me go ahead and do this. Okay, can you all see this Google Sheet that I have pulled up here?
Yes.
Okay, so I've done two different iterations of this. This very first one was right after it was a call you were on, Corey, and it was a call that Dr. Andrew Kaufman was actually hosting, where he was presenting the concept of exosomes, and Richie from Boston was on there, Jason
right.
Lindgren was on that call. Okay, are you guys both familiar?
I think Lindsay Sharman was on there.
Yeah, I was, and that was the one that went viral and got David Icke's attention and led to London Real and all sorts of stuff for Dr.
Yeah, exactly. All
awesome.
top-notch stuff. So with that being said, right after I finished watching that, I was pumped. I was like, this guy is on it. I got to go check this out, because I could not for the life of me reconcile that there was a physiological component to viruses. And at the same time, I was, for years prior, when I was working with another tech, his name is Richard Kirby, an IDF technician, he was showing that there were multiple different viruses showing up in the IDF, or the intrinsic data field, of multiple of our research clients. And so I've always had this very insane dichotomy, and I was just gung-ho about proving that viruses did not exist right after I watched that interview. So I came on and I started doing some of my own IDF investigation, and the very first question that I asked to establish basis for any further questions is, do viruses actually exist? Now, the scale and the amplitude calibration that we're getting here, 0 to 40 equals no, with things near 0 meaning hell no. 41 to 70 means maybe, and maybes are very elusive because it could mean that you didn't phrase things right. It could mean that you have a totally off theory, and that if your theory was right, maybe it could be true. It could mean it just, there's a whole wide world of whatever the hell maybe means. So I hate maybe answers. And then 71 to 100 means yes, with things near 71 meaning yes, and there's other things to consider here, bub, and 100 meaning hell yeah. So do viruses actually exist? It came up as 100% hell yeah. And I was like, well, okay, this isn't helping me. Then do viruses have their own RNA sequences? 99.1, yes. Are viruses able of creating pathology due to intracellular infection? 91.7. So again, for me, when I'm working with clients, anything in the 90 range, 90 to 100, when I'm asking yes, no questions, it means that it's a pretty hot lead. So that was saying yes. Is it correct to call viruses physical entities? 61.9. So that's a maybe. So it's like, is it correct to call viruses subtle entities? 94.6. Okay, so I just went through and I kept going down. Number 9, is the disease known as COVID-19 due to viral infection of SARS-CoV-2? 94. Okay, and then I just went all the way down. Now I'm going to show you. Well, I'm going to have to back out of that here in a second. Are you able to see the second screen? Are you able to see where it says investigation number 2? Okay, so after I chatted with Andy Kaufman personally, just a week, no more than maybe 10 days ago, I started realizing, okay, the science, the peer review is telling me is completely bunk. Maybe my answers will change, and maybe I had an influence. So I'm going to take a couple of other questions along the same lines and just see if I can either elaborate on questions that were already answered or ask the same question and see what happens. So I asked the same question. Notice in both of these, question number 1, do viruses actually exist? And both times I got 100% yes, they actually exist. Yeah. So then my next question was, are viruses, actually that's a typo, this should say do. Do viruses actually exist in the ways that modern science has attempted to demonstrate? The answer was 0.
Wow, absolutely.
Now,
not.
I think that's pretty significant, meaning hell no. Yeah. Are viruses contagious? 98.4 yes. Are viruses composed of either RNA or DNA? Now, I should have asked this, are they composed of RNA? Are they composed of DNA, as 2 separate questions? Yeah. That's one thing that, looking back at this, that I wish I would have done, but it gave me a 12.6. So it wasn't as hell no as I would have expected, but it's still very, very low number. Do viruses create pathogenic infections? 96.4. Is it true that viruses are subtle entities? 99.1. Is SARS-CoV-2 an actual virus? 99.3. Are all people susceptible to viruses? 97. Are some people more susceptible to viruses than other people? 95. Are there some people who are not susceptible to viruses at all? 100.
Like 3% of people, maybe?
Well, what this is indicating to me is that there is a way that a person can become insusceptible to a virus. That was my takeaway from that answer. That's maybe a question that we should ask during the course of this call. And now these next 5 questions are the most important next 4 questions technically that I think that we can discuss. Do viruses actually exist in the physical plane? 0. Wow. Do viruses exist in the astral plane? This would be the realm of ideas and emotions. 92.6. Do viruses actually exist in the causal plane? 91.6. The causal plane would be the realm where sacred geometry, form, structure, and the basic binary coding of masculine, feminine, 0, 1, positive, negative, etc. Even neutral fits into that ground, because when positive and negative cancel each other out, that's a neutral. So this is where the causal plane exists. Do viruses actually exist in the spiritual plane? 100. Those were the 4 most interesting questions that I think that I have actually asked to date. Because please go ahead.
Yeah, Phoenix. So I'm not sure I understand completely how you generated these numbers, but it seems like you're describing a mind virus or like a spiritual possession.
Precisely. And to draw it back to Paracelsus was talking about these very same types of conditions that we now attribute to viruses or bacteria, or what are conceived in modern allopathy as contagion. And he categorized every single one of them as ens spirituale, the cause of disease due to spiritual influence. And Steiner even has a number of different eurythmy forms in anthroposophic medicine, which is to say certain specified movement protocols, as well as meditation that is set higher than any of the remedies for treating most viral conditions, specifically ones of the upper respiratory tract, like, SARS-CoV-2 or the disease known as COVID-19. So that's it. Yeah, I would say that you're right on par there. And this is why these findings are really, really interesting to me.
Well, this is one kind of virus that I agree may actually exist.
I'm going to repeat for the people listening, because some people missed some of the explanation earlier, that this is an IDF device that reads the sort of subtle energy fields that exist everywhere. Correct me if I'm wrong after this, and that it's similar to Rupert Sheldrake's idea of the morphogenetic fields. So it's just kind of like the information that's in like the ether, we could say, that this machine reads. And radionics is another way of describing this method.
That's precisely right. Yeah, so intrinsic data field is basically just like a morphic field or a morphogenetic field, in that there's thousands of individual points of data that comprise the data of one entire organism, and where one ends and where one begins is clear, but at the same time, they're all comprised of one another. So for instance, from a microcosmic level, we take a look at, say, bacteria inside of the microbiome, and that that micrological bacteria has its own energy field, or its own even electromagnetic field that it produces as it's alive. And we're able to see this very, very elaborately, especially in soil samples. So everything is emitting a certain type of energy, whether we want to reduce it exactly to electromagnetic energy, or whether we want to open ourselves up beyond that spectrum. So like, for instance, people are composed of lots of different forms of energy. We're very aware of physical energy, but point to where your thoughts exist.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another form of subtle energy that we're constantly impacting. Same thing with our emotions. You interface with your emotions every day. Show me your emotions under a microscope. Can you do that? You can't. So these are all forms of subtle energy that exist, and intrinsic data field of an individual or of an item is able to contain all of the information about those various levels of subtle energy, regardless of their subtlety or density, that exists in a certain thing, or at least that's the philosophy and the concept. And this is elucidated by Dr. Richard Gerber in his book, Vibrational Medicine, very well, and points to numerous different studies that have been performed, lots of them at McGill University, actually, and shows that various different vibrational methods have basically shown us that as a lowest common denominator, there may be more than this, and there may be more sub-denominations, but there are at least a physical plane, an astral plane, or what we could call an emotional plane, a causal plane, or what some people would call a mental plane, and a spiritual plane. And there are those 4 different layers, common denominator between all the cultures on Earth, to the human multidimensional anatomy is what it's referred to. And so when we're performing IDF analysis, we are looking into the intrinsic data field of things. In the case where I'm asking questions about ideas, we're looking into the intrinsic data field of an idea. When we're looking into wellness or my spagyrics, for instance, we're focusing on one particular subject that is a little bit more concrete than an idea. So I don't put tons of stock into the answers that I get here, but it is corroborative evidence in many cases that, I mentioned earlier, I like to dip my toes into lots of different lakes or lots of different streams and submerge myself in the one that feels the most right, or also the one where the most waters converge, so to speak. And so when there is corroborative evidence from Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, anthroposophical medicine, Paracelsian medicine, allopathic medicine, if all of those overlap, for me, I have to say, seems pretty substantial that this is a universal truth, regardless of the way that you're looking at it. And the more corroborative evidence that I can provide, regardless of the perspective of observation, that is an indicator to me that we might be hot on the trail of something that is quote unquote perennial in the perspective of human observance. And so IDF is just one of these points of evidence that I like to draw from.
Well, I see a question coming up that I'm excited to talk about the answer to, but just so we know, everyone can see the chats when they pop up because it comes up on my screen. But I also think, Andy, maybe you had something to say before we go further in the questions.
No, I don't think. No, yeah, I didn't have a comment right now.
Okay. Sorry.
So, if the question is pertinent, let's go ahead and ask that before we move on. I think that it's important to get listener feedback.
Oh, no, sorry. The questions that you have here, I just saw does DNA exist in the way that modern science alleges?
Yeah, so does DNA actually exist? Now, in the esoteric realm, it's very popular for many people to feel or to believe or to think that there are actually 12 strands of DNA, not just 2 strands of DNA. But that poses the question, why is modern science only coming up with 2 helical strands of DNA instead of 12? And do those other 10 exist in more subtle dimensions? This is just a question. I'm not saying that I have any answers or even that I'm suggesting that there are 12 or that there are 10 others that exist in subtle dimensions. But these types of questions arise. So does DNA actually exist? 86.5. This is telling me, not being in the 90s or high 90s, yeah, and that's basically the way that answer would read. Does DNA exist in the way modern science alleges? 0. Now, this is something that Andy and I only touched on in our last call, and I would love his input. I've been searching genetics like crazy, and it seems to me like the entire field of genetics, because of PCR amplification methods, basically, seems to be really off. And being able to take a look at certain protein chains that exist inside of DNA, that seems to be more solid to me. But being able to find the way that things fit together and the way that it's so concrete in the way that modern science alleges, that does not seem congruent with my findings at all, because even like Andy was talking about earlier from his own perspective, you can oftentimes change things that are considered to be genetic causes of disease or diseases of genetic origin by altering the environment of an individual. And I have seen that numerous times in my practice, where the only way that I can describe that with modern scientific words is to say that epigenetics must hold a greater weight than what is currently attributed. So I would love actually Dr. Kaufman's thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, this is, maybe perhaps the next area of biological science that I'm going to really explore, because this is another, very deep kind of philosophical paradigm, right? The whole gene theory of that our information of what makes us individual and unique and what makes us this species or that, right, comes from this sequence of DNA that we inherit from our parents. But the thing about it is that we see that if we look at specific genes or mutations or variants, that we don't necessarily express those things at all, even though those are the copies that we inherited from our parents. And then there's other interesting things that genes seem to almost come out of nowhere when we need them. based on an environmental change, and then disappear and not be expressed at all suddenly when those environmental situations change. So there's certainly there is the field of epigenetics that is in the mainstream biological research, but it's pretty early in its progress, but they've already identified it as like a really high value source of targets for therapeutics and diagnostics. And of course they'll be looking to commercially exploit it, but really we can just have a huge impact on our genetic expression. I think this is something that we really don't have a good understanding of, and so I hope to do some additional study and learn more about it. But there are so many things like this. If you look at how our cells maintain their resting membrane, which is a very, very key thing, like all of the cells in our body are kind of like a battery, that they have a charge differential between inside the cell and the cell in the cytoplasm or cytosol versus outside the cell. And it's critical for the cell function to maintain this voltage. And it's, for different parts of our body, it's a different set point. And it's been told to us, like through molecular biology research, that there is a sodium potassium pump that, exchanges ions and maintains this voltage balance, because there has to be like more negative charge inside the cell compared to outside the cell. And, that's really important for how cells don't stick together, and they're functioning in many ways, and, proteins and other things they interact with. And so it's been determined actually that the amount of energy that it would be required to drive that pump to maintain that voltage is more than a cell could possibly produce. So this paradigm, right, has sort of been shattered just through that one energetic or stoichiometric analysis. And so now but nonetheless, if you look at every single textbook in biology, cell biology, molecular biology, physiology, right now, that's being taught at every university around the world, you'll see that that's the explanation for how the resting membrane potential is maintained. Yeah. So, there's this kind of big delay in getting the information out. It takes quite a lot of time. And then, people just don't want to question it and go deeper, right? Because then you have to come up with a new explanation. And then you also have to say, well, everything that was based on that assumption that was thought to be true now has to be re-examined and reconfigured, right? And this is like the exact parallel to germ theory and terrain theory, because we've had 100 years of science built upon germ theory, assuming it's correct, and we've had almost no science built upon terrain theory. I mean, there is some, don't get me wrong, but compared to the amount based on germ theory, it's it's like a grain of sand in the ocean.
See, and I thrive in change, and I love finding out new things. So I'm like, why not? Like, rip it all apart. Let's do all the new stuff. Whatever. I don't understand the attachment to keeping things the same, but I guess it's a heavy thing.
It should be like, universities should be about learning and curiosity and challenging the, whatever is the mainstream ideas. But they've become part of this economic system. And, everything is directed, and everything is about a financial incentive. And so it's really, of course, or worse.
Because I know one of the things that people were sort of screaming in the chat when we were talking about why people are doing this is the, possible motivation of just wanting control, or a sort of, that world engulfing possible motivation too. And none of us are, I think, averse to that idea. It's just not necessarily where we were going in this discussion, but but we can. And I know, Andy, you might need to leave soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I'm on the East Coast, so it's getting quite late for me. So yes, but I am enjoying the conversation.
Yes, well, maybe if we want to, because I know that we wanted to do a live sort of IDF investigation also, again, which would be really fun. And so maybe you don't necessarily want to stick around for that, but I do want to then get to a few more points that we can make, and let Phoenix present anything else to you that he might want to get your take on before you might have to go. And so I know, Phoenix, you wanted to talk about the morality aspect of possible viral transmission, or however we want to describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just screen share again so that people can take a look at these results. And these results were taken by Richard Kirby, either in late 2018 or early 2019. No, it must have been 2019, because May 2019, I got sick with a strep infection. Both Noriana and I did. And I was just downing all of the spagyrics that I normally would, andrographis root, different types of things like that, in order to be able to eliminate strep from my body. And I've never had an issue with that. But right before all of this happened, I was getting very sleepy. I was having, what could possibly be attributed to maybe adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue, or maybe chronic fatigue, at least having some of the symptoms of that for, a good couple of months prior to getting this infection. And I was working like crazy. So it could have just been that I was way overworked. At any rate, Richard Kirby did an analysis for me and said, hey, buddy, the reason that you have these strep infections is that the strep is actually floating around in an Epstein-Barr virus biofilm. And he says, you need to look into this book called The Medical Medium and read the information that is inside of that book and tell me what you think and if you want me to perform some analysis. So I did, and I came up with a couple of questions for him afterwards to analyze above and beyond putting in the programming into the SE5 around the virus, the nature of these viruses. Now, Richard is, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, he's really quite illiterate in many ways. He doesn't spell things very correctly. His grammar is awful. So there are naturally some phrasing things here that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'll just blow this up so everybody can see.
Did he spell adrenochrome correctly?
It looked like he did.
That's amazing.
I couldn't do that one.
So let me just pull that up again. Somehow I pulled out of that. There we go. So can humans be infected with Epstein-Barr virus through the consumption of pig meat? The answer is 99.4 yes. Can humans be infected with Epstein-Barr virus through consumption of animal meat? 99.1 yes. So I was like, how could that be? Do viruses exist due to metaphysical reasons? 16.7 means no. Do viruses exist due to dark magic? 89.1. Do viruses exist due to adrenochrome rituals? 95.7. And do EBV virus manifest via an open portal from immoral behavior? 99.5. I thought that was a really strange way of phrasing that, and I'll stop sharing now. I thought that was a really strange way of phrasing that, and I asked him, actually, where did that last question come from? Because that was not one that I asked, but one that he added in there. He says, well, I was just inspired to add it. He's like, I felt that if you could get it from pig meat or human meat and you had some sort of moral dilemma about eating pig meat or animal meat, would that open you up to having some sort of disease or something going on? And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because that's in some ways creating a little bit of a split, a psychological split.
Yeah.
Can that cause disease? Well, yeah, I've seen that multiple times. Is it the root cause of the disease? I don't know. Can we explain bipolarity or say chronic depression just by neurotransmitters and by hormone imbalances or deficiencies or bioreplication deficiencies due to the microbiome being off? Like, for instance, shikimate pathway goes out, so you can't bioreplicate enough of your own serotonin through the microbial pathways in the gut. Yeah, maybe. Okay, sure. But this concept of immoral behavior really came up. And so we did some more analysis around that. And the answer for what immoral behavior is constituted as is anything that transgresses the conscience of the individual who is perceiving an action or performing an action. So if you do something that you feel is wrong, then that is considered immoral behavior, or unconscionable action would be another term of that. And that could create a psychological split, because now you literally have to create some form of justification around why you did whatever it is that you did. And that type of split, in spagyric terminology, literally splits the soul. The ego tries to justify the behavior. The higher self, or the soul, the higher ramifications of the soul, try to live in accord with a certain sense of cosmic harmony and principle. And when those two are at diabolical odds, does that create a spiritual disorder, or in spirituale? And the answer, based on all of my findings, were yes, it does, and that this could be a cause of disease. And we also found that only people who, by their own, in our IDF study, only people who, by their own definition, performed unconscionable behaviors were actually susceptible to any of the HHV strains, of which I know that there are 8 that are considered to exist inside of modern science. That would be human herpes viruses, is what HHV stands for. So HHV1, well, I guess there's 6A and 6B. So if you count all of those, that's 9 different strains of HHV that exist. And the only clients that we had with any of those were individuals who self-admittedly had performed very unconscionable behaviors in the last 12 months. So whether that is proof or evidence, or regardless of any of that fact, I found that to be a very interesting data point.
Yeah. What does anything in your experience, Andy, support that sort of idea? Like, I know it's a very almost non-materialist sort of take or something, so I'm not sure what your take on it would be. Not that
Yeah,
I'm
not
a materialist, but
no, I'm definitely not a materialist. I can't think of an example that I had where I would, exactly describe it that way, but it certainly, is possible. Like, I'm thinking of maybe a parent who is like adopted a child, but then doesn't tell them that they're adopted. Something like that can sort of create that kind of a split situation. But I haven't, found someone who was ill as a result of that per se, but
right.
It certainly would make sense, right? Because that's sort of related to the kind of conflict shocks that they would have in German new medicine, right?
Yeah,
it's just
true.
a different way of describing it, but it is quite interesting.
I wonder if we can add that into our investigation tonight, the idea that the conflict shock might be similar to the unconscionable, immorality that might allow these things to come in. It's very interesting, and it would sort of also perhaps add to the transmission idea that if people are sort of together in something unconscionable almost, because I think when I say here or the word unconscionable, it makes me think of something really truly like evil almost, but I think in this sense it could be even a pretty small thing, like, oh, I shouldn't have yelled at that person because they didn't give me my coffee fast enough or whatever,
Precisely. People feel bad for all sorts of reasons, like where I might kill a spider not even thinking about it. At a different point in my life, I was so Pythagorean that I would walk around barefoot and take care to step away from ants. At one point, if I would have stepped on an ant, not even killed it, I would have felt terrible about my existence. Whereas these days, that doesn't bother me whatsoever. So I've actually experienced this in myself where I've caused stress, which, do you agree, Andy, that stress, this is even a modern major allopathic assumption these days, is that 90% of disease is due to some form of psychosomatic stress or psychosomatic origin. Would you agree that psychological stress is one of those major psychosomatic causes of disease in your practice? I wouldn't say that it's like the underlying cause of most diseases, but it's often a contributing factor. And, some people, it can really make the severity of the situation much, much worse. Like the problem, the body can't really handle it because, I think one way that I conceptualize this is that we're under a stress kind of physiology or a fear response, like they could be chronic, like, survival instinct, that it consumes all the body's resources.
right? Because, illness is something else that consumes a lot of resources, right? Because we have to, now instead of focusing on, the day-to-day operations, we have to focus on repairing a situation, or in the other case, right, we have to do that work. And so if the body's energy is drawn away from that, then we're more susceptible, right? Drawn away by the stress, dealing with that, then we're going to be more susceptible to, other things, or less able to handle other things. So there'll be increased severity. I mean, the mind-body interaction is, such a key aspect to medicine, and it's so ignored, right? It's usually in allopathic medicine, it's just blame one or the other. And, people can withstand surgery, because of they're using their mind, right? That's pretty darn real.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't do it.
So something that you said, it corroborates my experience 100%. And I wasn't forward thinking enough to be able to pull up some case studies that didn't have names and sensitive information attached to them for the purpose of this call. But it's that usually en spirituale is not the root cause of most of the IDF individuals' imbalances or diseases that I see with my research clients. However, it is a contributing cause at least 80% of the time, I would say. And now I'm making that number up off the top of my head, just thinking back on all of the different data that I've seen and saying, yeah, it's probably at least 8/10 of the time. That being said, it does seem that it exacerbates the condition really bad. So let's put together what you have asserted with what, especially with terrain theory and exosomes and foreign toxicity. Let's pretend that there are absolutely no contagions. Let's also just put on our pretend hats for a second, regardless of what camp we're in, and say that what causes what we are currently attributing to viral diseases is actually some form of overload of toxicity and an exosome response. Would you agree that if somebody were psychologically stressed, that would compound the disease or the intensity of that disease?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we've all experienced this too, like when we've, maybe been grieving during cold and flu season, or experienced some other kind of major stressful event, fired from a job, or, whatever it could be, divorce, that, we're getting sick during that time, like for sure, right? I mean, I can think of several examples. I remember one time I was going through a major stressful time like this, and I got like this huge pimple on my cheek. It was like a physical manifestation of the problem.
Yeah.
I'm
not a child anymore. Why is this happening?
So with that being said, that's corroborative to my evidence and my research work, and also in just, healing and taking care of myself as well. With that being said, I think the way that I'm interpreting the IDF results is that viruses, unlike what Steiner maybe would have asserted or otherwise, or how they might be contagious, has something to do with mirror neurons. Mm-hmm. It has something to do with seeing, because here's a response that I know for a fact. When I see other sick people, whether they have cancer or anything, there's a part of me that is like a tuning fork in my psyche that is like, oh, what if I had this? What if I was in their position? What if I was suffering this way? There's some sort of human condition to human condition sympathy that is happening. And that happens. And I also go into, or have historically gone into, a certain fear around, I don't want to catch this, or I want to make sure that I stay healthy. And so for me, I overcompensated perhaps with liposomal vitamin C, or with immune boosting herbs, or other different types of things like that my own training has kind of dictated to do. But I'm wondering if what a virus is a spiritual / psychological component that is able to infect the mind and therefore aggravate and intensify the condition that a person may be experiencing cellularly or internally through principles of terrain theory, or what in Paracelsianism is referred to as ens naturale. And that is what I, at the present moment, am able to reconcile or conceptualize based on all of the data points that I now have at this very moment. And that's always subject to change. If I find better information tomorrow, that's going to change my opinion. But where I'm at.
Yeah. So I think I agree that definitely exists. The only thing that is kind of challenging about discussing it is using the term virus, because
Right.
you mention that to a layperson, they think it's a physical entity, right? Germ that causes disease, and then the word in the Latin root means poison, or actually I think it was used to describe snake venom.
Right.
Right. And then, but there's a word that comes from, I'm not sure which indigenous culture, but I think in the Americas, called Wetiko, and which is very similar to what you're describing, like the mind virus. And I think, and colloquially, right, we kind of understand the word virus as something that is like pervasive, negative, and spreads quickly. Right. So in a sense, in that meaning, I think it's an accurate term for what you're describing, right? Because this is really what's going on now with all of the people who are, locking themselves voluntarily at home and living in fear, is that they have this mind virus, and it is going to render them physically ill in many cases, or exacerbate any other physical illness, like as you described. Right. And, maybe this is what is going to be called the second wave. Right. Even.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So it's very significant, but I don't know if there's a cure for this one.
I think that there might be, though, and this could be something that maybe we're going to have to pick up on another call, given the hour right now, especially on the East Coast, getting very late. But we should definitely consider approaching different ways of eliminating the stresses that could be exacerbating the condition, because the conditions themselves, and I have lots of different data from clients I've worked with, they're all over the place. Like I said, I have people who tested positive who were asymptomatic. I have people who tested negative who were symptomatic. So are the people who are negative and tested, or people who tested negative and are symptomatic, are they creating the condition purely out of the psychological component? And are the people who are positive, testing positive, but asymptomatic, also holding back the disease because of their mindset? I don't know the answer to these questions. This is just something that I think really needs to be explored in a viable way, either with research or peer review in a different method than what it has been performed clinically, because
we could just say honest research. Let's simplify it.
So some sort of honest research, and especially on a grassroots level. I think that people inherently trust folks like yourself and myself, who are detached very largely from Rockefeller medicine in general.
Yes.
9/10 of the time.
Way more of you.
Yeah, like 9/10 of the time. Oh, go ahead.
When I was younger, like if I could have, like made a living and have a lab like in my backyard, or, like Phoenix, I'm not sure where looks like it's a combination of a laboratory and your living environment, right? Like if I could have had that situation and do science and, just explore it the way I want, and it was, I could make a living from it, though, without having to create a product or apply for grants, like I would have definitely done that. It was really when I saw how you have to get funded, and that you basically have to write a 200-page sales pitch, and you have to do the exact research project that they're delineating at the government level most frequently, that it lost its luster.
See, and I did exactly the former thing that you were saying. If I could have done that, it took me a long time. I lived in poverty throughout most of my 20s. What do they say? 20s are your learning years, 30s are your earning years, and 40s are your yearning years. Well, my learning years were real tough, I'll tell you that. I mean, we're talking like sometimes less than $5,000 per year in total income. But when you subject yourself to being able to do this for long enough, man, like, it's just like, here I am, the entire basement level of our house is converted into a laboratory for one. And that's not unique to me. Most alchemists actually have had to do that. That alchemy has not been a very legitimate subject for at least 300 or 400 years now. And so by the scholastic merit at any rate. And so all of us who perform things have to perform things more or less in the privacy of our own homes in order to do it. And so I drove a lot of inspiration from people who came before me, like the Frater Albertus at the Paracelsus Research Institute, which was here in Salt Lake City from 1960 to 1984, the largest alchemy school in over 500 years at the time. And they just had basically one whole building that was dormitory and a big basement that had a laboratory inside of it. And that was how people were practicing alchemy. So my perspective of what a laboratory looks like and what is capable to be done at home has always been just really progressive by modern perspective, I suppose. And I tried to, for years, apply for grants. And because the things I wanted to do were so far outside of the scope of what is accepted within the modern medical realm, I wasn't applicable for any grants. And so I had to end up creating research programs that were self-funded by the people who wanted that type of research and who valued that type of research to be able to do it. And it wasn't really until, maybe four or 5 years ago that this really began to catch on in mass. And so I've had to be a bit of a chameleon, really, in developing a way to make it even remotely financially sustainable in order to get to the point where we're at today. And education is primarily what ended up sustaining me, because there are always people who want to learn this. In fact, Andy, if I'm not mistaken, you wanted to learn about spagyrics as well.
Yeah. Right? Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love a good distillation.
Yeah. Exactly. So, it's one of those things that, for our listeners out there, I just want to encourage them, try and disentangle from the shit show that is, I don't know if I can say that, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
From the shit show that is our modern American culture or a modern Western allopathic model, and try and engage in as much of the research as you possibly can. Now, my own personal suggestion with that would be, try and overlap and don't go too far outside of the bounds of modern science in a certain regard, because they're going to point fingers at you. You might also get suicided. Different types of things like that if you come across a really important discovery. But if you play within your means and do what is meaningful and work with important clients, the demographic is out there and people really truly want it.
Yes. Well, I want to just throw out there that one of the ways we might be able to attack this mind virus that everyone's suffering under is through the mirror neuron process, and we can shine our little light at them, and maybe that can stimulate something in them that they'll have a sympathetic vibration with. But
Lindsay, I've been piloting that, and it's not very successful thus far.
Well, that's not true. That's not true, Doc, because I can't tell you the amount of people that have written into me saying, hey, Fee, you have shown that there are viruses on your IDF, and Andy has shown that there's no such thing. So how are you, what is this? You're reaching out to a very wide network of people and influencing minds and behavior in a way that I think may still be unprecedented to you. I get hundreds of requests a month of people requesting information from me like this through the socials, through email, through YouTube comments, things like that. You're making a huge difference like that, even if it's not as immediate as swallowing a pill.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and that I'm definitely trying. But I was more talking about in my personal, in real life interactions. When I approach someone with a mask and I'm trying to make eye contact and say, hey, I'm a person too, kind of thing. And that's very difficult, but I know the spell of the mask is very powerful.
Very powerful.
Yes.
That's a powerful morphogenetic field. But I know that Andy, you have to go, and then Phoenix, do you want to stay on and do some IDF?
Oh yeah. I'm good for as long as the audience is good.
Okay, so we'll do that. But Andy, before you go, I wonder if you could share with us, where people can contact you, which I think is probably a lot of them already are in contact with you, but just in case. And then also, if you have anything coming up you want people to know about, and your final sort of words that you want to leave people with.
Yeah, sure. Please, find me on my website at andrewkaufmanmd.com, where you can get in touch with me or request a consultation. I have some material and videos on there as well. And check out my YouTube channel if you haven't seen it yet. And I do have a couple of projects that I'm pretty excited about. I'm collaborating on a short film where we talk about the symbol of the caduceus in medicine with Steve Falconer from Spacebusters.
Awesome.
And so that's going to be coming out pretty soon. And I'm also going to be launching a monthly webinar series or a class where people can sign up, and I'll be, talking, like giving a lot of instruction about various ways to maintain and promote your health, like things that you can do on your own at home, and then be available to like have back and forth with people so they can ask like personal questions, people that may not, want a full consult or not sure what to do. So I'm pretty excited about that, to like reach a lot of people about, some of the things we're talking about, how individuals can really, promote their own health and empowering them to do that.
Awesome.
Can
I just ask really quick, is Ophiuchus going to be a part of that documentary?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yay. Awesome. So what are your final ideas that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, well, I definitely enjoyed this, and it was, a very thought-provoking discussion, and you can see how there's many different ways to, approach this material. But I think, really the most important message there right now for people is, to take advantage of this moment that we're in, to, really think about things carefully and take care of yourself, work on yourself. You don't want to be one of the people vulnerable, to illness, and you want to be, prepared to face any challenging things coming up, and recognize, that we all are all connected to each other, right? We're not all the same, but we all have this connection in our humanity, and our nature is to like cooperate and support each other, right? Like in this community, I haven't been speaking publicly for very long, and in this short time, I've got to meet quite a number of people, and I'll tell you that almost every single person is just so like welcoming and open, and wants to combine ideas and bounce things off each other, and like we're all kind of considering like what's important for us to discuss, and information to get out there, but we're also like all kind of like, how are we going to individually handle the situation going forward, right? And so I think I'd like people to mirror that sense of community and cooperation, and like reach out to each other and be receptive to make new connections and support, because we really need to be somewhat of a coherent force to realize this new future, that we can really come out with something incredible.
Yeah.
Well said. After my own heart. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been awesome for all of our listeners and the people who are going to watch this in the future as well. And I appreciate all that you do very, very much. So thank you very much. And for anyone listening or watching, we're going to stick around with Phoenix and some IDF. But thank you, Andy, for being here tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. You also, you're all, we're all contributing together, and I've learned a lot from both of you guys as well. So
Awesome.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Awesome. Well, that was so much fun. I have so many people who sent me questions to ask on this episode, and I don't know if we want to look into those questions to start, or if you had questions you wanted to start with, or there's some that came up as we were talking about sort of all this stuff that I thought would be fun to do. So where do you want to go?
You know what? I think that let's follow up really fast on some of the questions that came up during the course of our call, because I think that we could probably count those on both hands or less, right?
I think so.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and do those, and then we'll go from there. So I'm just going to screen share.
Okay. And one of the, I don't know if we should start here or not, it's up to you, but one of the ideas I had when we were talking about the investigations you've already done is whether or not it could be that, and forgive me if I missed this, if we already answered it, but whether it could be that the entity, if there's a dark entity, like a spiritual entity that is, that is the virus or is causing this or whatnot, could it be that that is somehow sort of grabbing whatever DNA is? Because one of the questions said it was DNA. It did have a DNA or something, right? And so
a DNA component to it,
right.
Yeah.
So could it be that it's grabbing like our DNA, part of our DNA or something, and that is what it meant?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I'm just thinking of how to phrase this in a clear, concise way where we can get a yes/no question. If you have any ideas, just toss it out. Otherwise, I'm just going to think about this for a sec.
Do dark entities use our DNA against us? Would that be? Or
do dark entities use our DNA as what?
I was going to say against us, but maybe that's too broad. Maybe like use our DNA to create viruses?
Yeah, let's ask that. And if that doesn't pop up as either yes or no, then let's rephrase that maybe just a couple of different ways.
Okay.
Like it'll usually say maybe or no. And if we feel like we're on something, I like to rephrase it in as many different ways as I can, because the intrinsic data field of an idea is only going to respond to if the idea is correct or if we're even on the right train. So, okay, so since last time that I did this, I picked up a new piece of equipment. It's a very new invention, but it interfaces with the SE5. It's called the SE5 Precision Stick Detector. So when I get the right answer, people will actually hear, well, tell me if you can hear this. Did you hear that little beep? Okay, and can you see the amplitude spike on my screen right in here? Like that. Yeah. So when we get the right answer, not only will the amplitude stick, but now listeners can also hear and see the visual EQ showing that we have the right answer. Cool. Okay. So do dark entities use our DNA to create viruses? 94.1. Wow. So yeah, I'd say yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So do dark entities manipulate DNA to create intracellular infections? This is a really good question, by the way. Both of these are, thank you for bringing them up.
You're welcome.
Yeah, 94.7. Okay.
So then that makes sense why it can say both that there's a DNA component and it's sort of spiritual in nature.
Man, anytime that I get weird answers that I don't understand, it usually leads me down a rabbit hole where I have to ask more questions to try and understand how or why that question came up. That's a big part of this work and why it's literally almost limitless. All right, shoot away. What's our next question?
I also had the idea of is DNA, because you had said that we're not really understanding DNA correctly, and could it be that DNA is more like a manifestation of the like collective unconscious or something, because I know the epigenetic thing is true, and I know that there's information encoded, and so maybe it's something like that?
Let's find out. No.
Not even a little.
Is DNA a manifestation of the collective unconscious? It's within the yes realm, but it's like, yeah.
Maybe it's not even manifest. Maybe is DNA the collective unconscious?
Whoops. Is DNA the collective? Well, let's ask, is DNA made manifest
Okay.
in physical reality?
Oh, good question.
Let's start there. 64.9. So
Maybe
it means maybe.
Maybe it's
So
like sometimes it is and sometimes it, like if we choose for it or if we're like applying it or like, I don't know.
let's ask, what percentage of DNA exists in physical reality?
It can do that. It can tell you percentages.
Oh yeah,
Awesome.
because we're working on 0 to 100.
True.
So let's just do this. $31.8.
Weird. Like a third.
Yeah. So yeah, that begs a bunch of other questions. Let's just ask for the hell of it while we're doing this. Are there actually 12 strands of human DNA? $90.1.
Are 9 of them not manifest?
Well, can I tell you something?
Yeah.
When I ask, so I ask questions like this a lot for my IDF clients. When I go through and I do their analysis, yours included, I find things that say, how many IDF broadcasts does enter the person's name need in order to address the situation using the tunings I've identified? So I have to be like very specific about it.
Yeah.
And if it gives me an answer of 90, then what I would say is, okay, yeah, I'm pretty hot on the trail. Let me go one up and one down and see what the answer is there. So sometimes if I go one up and I say, are there, in this case, 13 strands of human DNA, that might actually say 95 or 97. So let's just go ahead and ask that. And if there's not, I'm going to add that to it because that's a pretty significant answer. Okay, so 13 strands of human DNA. Let's see what we get.
So it's higher.
That was a weird reading. My knob was fluctuating and there was a delay here. So I'm just going to take this again from the beginning. 84.1. So I would say that there's not 13 strands. Let's ask if there's 11 strands.
Okay.
And then I feel comfortable moving on. %100%.
Wow.
So it looks as if there could be 12 strands, there could be 13 strands, but it looks like 11 strands are actually the actual number, which I'm not understanding how or why that would be true. So this is another one of those damn rabbit holes that it throws me down.
Huh. I wonder if there's 11 dimensions and there's one for each or something.
Okay, let's ask that. Is there one strand of DNA that exists in each of 11 dimensions?
Whoa.
Okay, there you have it.
So that indicates to me that we actually exist in all of those dimensions at one time somehow, right?
Well, now let's ask. Well, this is the concept behind human multidimensional anatomy. I used to work with, he called himself an alchemical hypnotherapist or an alchemical hypnotist, I forget which, but his name is Ronald Locklear Vinyl, and he's from the Orange County, California area, but at the time that we were working together, he was living in Sedona, Arizona with his wife, Virginia. And he has a book, Journey to the 10th Dimension, where it's a lot like, do you know who Dolores Cannon is?
Yeah.
Okay, so his work is a lot like Dolores Cannon's work in that he puts people under, asks random questions about the nature of the universe or deep things, and he had a proclivity or a penchant, if you will, for working with people who were already trained in remote viewing, so that their synapses of their brain could go deeper and disassociate between what they felt was real in waking consciousness and what answers they were receiving without having any sort of belief system or schism or split psychologically about the information that they were divining.
Yeah.
And that book is really, really fascinating, just like Dolores Cannon's works, The Convoluted Universe, really, really fascinating work. In that he assessed that there were 10 dimensions. This might say that there's 11 dimensions,
Yeah.
or 12 dimensions even, and maybe that one of the strands of DNA, or that if there's only 11 strands of DNA, that there may be 12 dimensions and not a strand that exists in one of those 12 dimensions, for instance. It isn't represented in the DNA. So let's just ask, how many dimensions exist that human beings interface with? And if this is different than 12 or 11 or 10, then what we're going to have to ask that human DNA interfaces with. So let's just, I'm going to go slow on this so that we can get each number pretty clearly. $17.3. So now let's ask that same question about human DNA.
I just have a weird, I think 17.3 is a number that has to do with something, this is going to be so random, about planets and a couple different geometric shapes and how they align on a planetary scale, which I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but in case someone listening or you.
To me, that does actually, because in the causal plane, I was talking earlier that the causal plane is comprised primarily of geometries. If we were to take the subdimension of the causal, or if we were to take the causal plane as one dimension, but break it up into subdimensions, we know that there are multiple different categories. Like, for instance, there are Platonic solids, and there are also Archimedean solids, and there are also other solids that fit into neither of those categories, like the work that shows up in Dr. Tom Cowan's Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, called the chestahedron. So there are multiple different groupings, and there are also like asymmetrical geometries. There's two-dimensional geometries, three-dimensional geometries, et cetera, that we can look at. But all a geometry is a series of binary. And what I mean by that is that there are lines and angles.
Yeah.
Lines and angles are like the zeros and ones of the coding of the causal universe, or, you know, if you wanted to refer to it, the basis behind all reality.
Wow.
So it could very well be like something that you're talking about there. And if anybody here who's listening is familiar with the works of Johannes Kepler, you might see that he was working with that type of planetary cosmology of different interlocking and interlaced Platonic solids comprising the energy of various planets. So you could be very hot on the trail.
Wow. Well, that, and then I just had a random thought too that maybe I'm misremembering the 17.3 is actually perhaps
That ring in at 11.4 to 11.7.
Huh. Which is close to the 11, I mean, that we got.
Yeah, exactly. So we should just ask, just to, and we'll ask a yes, no now that we have some data, is does human DNA interface with 11 different dimensions? And we'll see what this answer is, and then we're going to ask that same question about 12 and see which is the closer answer. Okay, so that's pretty good. Yeah. 87.8 is, that's clearly in the yes. Let me just copy that, and we'll ask 12 and take our reading.
Huh.
It rang right at 100%. So there we have it. Okay, so is there, I don't know how to, what I want to say is, why are there only 11 strands of DNA if we interface with 12 different dimensions? But it must be that one different dimension is either so subtle that it's not actually even considered a strand, or that it's maybe the glue that holds the rest of the 11 together.
That's what I was going in my mind too, that there's one that's just all of them together sort of, and we can't even conceive of that level of unity or something, or we can't interact with that level of unity or something like that.
Yeah, maybe the DNA just doesn't interface with that level because it is the summation of all the levels.
And DNA by its very nature is maybe divisive isn't the right word, but
yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, exactly. So I'm not 100% about how to interpret that data, but there we have it. There's some answers to the questions.
It's pretty amazing. I know there's people still. It's hard because I think people come in at different times of the broadcast we're doing, but they're kind of like, wait, what is this? Why would we trust this? What is this? But I would just refer them back to the previous episodes we've done, because I think we, or even earlier in this episode, because I think we explain it like relatively well, and then I think people would have to kind of do their own research to sort of look into things like IDF and radionics and sort of,
Exactly. Take a look into the works of Dr. Royal Rife, Dr. Albert Abrams, find the progression of the different radionics technologies. One thing that I'm always talking about the different instruments that exist in radionics world, or psionics, psychotronics, these are all terms to discuss the same type of technology, is that all instruments are not created equal. If I go and get a ukulele, or if I go and get a bouzouki, or if I go and get a trumpet, and I play all of those instruments, they're not going to sound at all the same, but they still achieve the same notes. And in certain ways, we can even, we can play the game of music, so to speak, with all of those instruments, but the sounds that come from them, the type of music we can play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is different. The SE5-1000 is like the synthesizer, so to speak, of the radionics world, in that it's probably, as far as I've experienced and as far as my research goes, the most advanced instrumentation that we have to be able to test things. Wow. Now, one thing I can tell you that is absolutely true, if you go out and you buy yourself an SE5-1000, speaking of which, if you want to do that, just go ahead and contact me, and I will put you in touch with the people to be able to do these things and to inquire about that. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time finding information about it directly, but I can put you in touch with the people directly. Cool. So here's the thing, is that the energy purity of the operator has to be exceptionally high. You have to have a very high vibration, you have to have very low interferences, you have to have very few disruptions going on. So I'll show you how I do this and how we have to calibrate this. I've already run these. I was running these while Andy Kaufman was saying goodbye. And here's basically it. This plus ADD, RVN, OWAM, this is what type of biases does this person have? This is a positive tuning, which means that if I had no biases, it should operate at 100. So I'll just take that tuning again for all of our viewers. Okay.
Wow.
The ADDR MVN OWAM has no plus behind it here, and what that indicates is that it's a negative tuning, so I start at 0 and move up. Now, anything above a 0 would indicate that I have some sort of bias to whatever answers are happening. Now, I have to be in a very, very grounded spot. Those who want to learn more about this, by the way, are invited to tune into our future scheduled event, which will be July 7th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Yours and mine, and we'll be talking about vibrational medicine. We'll be talking a lot about radionics technology and why I use IDF in order to interface with the multiple different dimensions of human health, or human multidimensional anatomy, as I like to refer to it as, and we just go from there.
Yeah, come back to Rogue Ways on that day to learn more on the 7th, sorry.
Here's the energy purity. Now, if any of the positive tunings, the ones with the plus behind them, come back below 85, the interrogator, or the person operating the instrument, should balance and clear themselves using IDF technology, and then come back and take their readings again. And if they're still not high enough, then they should come back at a different time and try and perform it. So this isn't something that you can just, anybody can just pick one of these up and do it. I have 15 plus years of psychic development experience, and I'm constantly running multiple different energy tools. Speaking of which, people who listen on July 7th, I'll be giving away my free energy tool album, or giving away the energy tool album I created multiple years ago. for free to all of the listeners who join. I'll just be giving a link to download it.
So cool.
So those energy tools are like grounding, running energy, using the rose to neutralize energy. Different types of things that I've learned from people like Jim Self and Michael Tamura, from the Bostwick, I forget his name, Berkeley Psychic Institute. All of these different types of individuals have instructed me in a number of different techniques in order to be able to form the basis of me even being able to get correct results. And part of the reason why I no longer work with the technician that we were outsourcing to for years is because when I've asked him to show me his intake clearances in the past, there's a major discrepancy behind the numbers that I would like to see. Because if these are off, like for instance, if my energy purity isn't at 100 and it's only at 40, for instance, which I would never even perform something if it is so low, that gives me 60% variation in the answers that I could get. Or if I have a bias, let's say that my bias is only 3 points and it comes in at a 97 here and a 3 here, that means that there's still 3% room for discrepancy. So for me, I'm always shooting to maintain that I am an operator that is just simply trying to objectively find the answer to tap into the IDF of the idea, the person, the thing that is being analyzed, and to just be a conduit for whatever that answer is, and to not step into the way. And by so doing, I'm able to achieve no biases and very low interferences. With the energy purity, I'm constantly running Mother Earth energy and Father Earth energy, or Father Consciousness energy, and being a battery where they constantly meet. And it's kind of an elaborate visualization of how those two meet and how I'm just a battery. But then that keeps me as a neutral center point for both different forms of consciousness.
It's really interesting to me to hear you talk about those aspects, because I, and I'm sure we'll get more into it on the 7th when people come back to that. But it reminds me of the same types of work that I would do, or that other people would do on, if they're like like doing shamanic work or like psychic energy, or sort of, you'd want the same sorts of things. You'd have similar sorts of visualizations, and it's just very interesting to hear that described. And I feel like, knowing me and my electronic weirdness, like the things that prevented us from starting on time today, that my readings would be off and I would not maybe be a good practitioner of this.
Yeah, definitely at the time that we were trying to get things going, that would not be the right time to form an analysis.
Yeah.
Having some weirdness with my stick pad. My fingers are sticking and I'm getting an EQ reading, but it's not beeping at around 94.3. So I'm just going to try that one more time on my sodium chloride balance. There we go. Okay, 96. Okay. So this is me as the operator, 100% vitality, 96.1 acid alkaline balance, 96% sodium chloride balance. And the sodium chloride is very important because this is what creates electrical resistance between cells. It's the water around the cells and the exclusion zone, of course, and then also the sodium chloride to be able to connect it. So I can't be a very clear channel if my sodium chloride isn't in balance. And same thing with my acid alkaline balance. Acid and alkaline actually create a chemical reaction that allows for proper electrical resistance. And so all of these things have to be in place for an operator to actually get proper results. And as you can see, biases, I have 0. Yeah. Energy purity at 100, I have absolutely 0 on my interferences. My vitality is high. My acid alkaline balance is within the 96th percentile, and so is my sodium chloride balance.
Wow. That's pretty awesome. And then, so that's really cool to know that you as an operator have that much effect on it, because that just makes sense to me as far as like how things work. But but what about, someone suggested earlier that all of us watching this, we have, it looks like at least 57 people watching right now, and then you and I are both obviously watching, and perhaps even people in the future listening have some effect or something. So how much does that affect possibly the outcomes? And maybe the answer is that you sort of have your own like purity and balance that it wouldn't at all, but maybe someone less balanced would.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, me doing this on the last call and now doing it this time, I'm the only person who has ever live streamed IDF analysis or investigations. So I don't know. So let's just ask and see if we can get to an answer. So what percentage of importance is placed on the observation of others upon an IDF analysis.
Nice.
And let's just see what we get. .7%.
That's pretty small.
So, and let's check to see about the operator.
Yeah.
What percentage of importance is placed on the observation of the operator upon an IDF analysis? Stopped. I was moving my dial kind of fast. Let's take that tuning one more time, and I'll go a little slower and see if we get a different answer here. It's about the same.
Huh.
So 90 to 92%, somewhere in there. And this one rang up at 91.8.
I love that. So it really is your purity and your kind of mental space and electric space is key. It's crucial, and the small amount can be observation of the others.
Exactly. So it's like I said before, observation of the person performing things. Observation is creation.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, it's the observation that I have. And if I choose to place attention on something, that's going to cut my results badly.
But your
because
lack of bias, I think, plays a significant role.
See, and attention, the dynamics of that spiritually are that I'm actually going out of the center of my head, paying attention. I literally have to trade it as a currency to whatever it is that I want to bring back. So paying attention uses attention as a currency to pay for whatever information or data that you are trying to receive, okay? Awareness is just a neutral state of observation where I'm just literally being aware of something. I can allow it to impress itself upon me without having a particular perception. So there's a huge difference between attention and awareness. Awareness is a state of observation, a neutral state of observation that happens from inside the center of the head of an individual. Attention is a currency that must be paid as a transaction outside the individual. The attention originates in the center of the head, gets paid, and then draws the information that you paid, your attention for back into the center of the head and allows it as data. And by paying attention to other people, you oftentimes allow other people's thoughts or opinions to be in the center of your head. They have nothing to do with you at all. Yeah. So this is a big part of the psychic training that I've had, is to be able to clear my field as much as possible of other people's thoughts or opinions in the center of my head, and just to simply be aware of things, especially when I'm performing psychic work or healing work.
I can tell with myself as well that when I'm more in that state of awareness rather than attention, that I'm everything's better, really. Someone has a good question. It's not necessarily for the IDF, but just for you. And the question was, do you feel like this is almost like a form of electronic or technological channeling?
That's precisely what it is. Okay. In fact, I joke around sometimes, and when people are like, do you know the answer to this? I'm like, no, but I should consult the oracle. Yeah. So basically, IDF anybody can do this, okay? So you don't need to interface with an electrical instrument, but in order for me to have reliable data that I can use this on, and I'm currently training people to perform, certain individuals that I'm working with right now, to perform peer review with this too. So asking the same questions and seeing if we all get around the same answers is something that we're doing. And we're starting with objects and materials and people and wellness analysis instead of investigations, because I already suspect that investigations are going to take a much, and this is an investigation. An analysis is if I have a particular tuning. So up here in the tuning realm, there's usually numbers that look like two numbers or two letters, dash two numbers or two letters. Those are called US 2 tuning rates, or sometimes UK 2 tuning rates, depending on how it's taken. There's also 3 tuning rates that use 3 different dials. There's also a series of numbers that are kind of long. There's lots of different ways that tunings can come across, but they're typically alphanumeric and include some number of alphanumeric digits. When I take a look into, say, the thyroid, there are some tunings that I have found to be more accurate than others. And so those are the ones that I'm able to engage in peer review with and start that off so that I can cut out and use as many controls as we possibly can to cut out as many variables as that could be interrupting the work or giving us various different data. So I've been working at this for like 2 or 3 years now in how do we peer review this type of information among different colleagues using the same pictures, the same questions, not having anybody else's answers, and then they contribute all their answers to myself, and then I compare the data and publish the data. So this is something that I'm at the very, very, very beginning realms of, so that I can take what my case studies are and see if other people can get the same results. But with IDF investigation, which does not have a tuning, it just says word tuning and we're asking questions, I anticipate that people are going to have a pretty elaborate psychic training background in order to clear, channel, balance, harmonize all of their different points of multidimensional anatomy in the same way that I do, because I've already found that the owner of the company, myself, and also one of my old techs that we outsourced to in the past have asked some questions, only one series of questions so far, in an attempt to peer review this way, and we all came up with different numerical values, but almost similar answers.
Okay.
But some of the answers did have fluctuations to it, and they don't have they have more IDF experience than I do, but they have like virtually zero psychic experience in the ways that I do, and if I want to try and peer review things, I have to create a standardized methodology for what is expected of people in order to perform this type of work. So it is highly subjective, and I'm not even indicating or trying to suggest that the answers that we have are absolute truth. Like I tried to make clear earlier, I don't use this as my guide for absolute truth. What I do is I take readings, and if there is other corroborating information that suggests that the readings that I have could largely be true or have substantial basis to them, then I compare my readings with that information, and that's the way that I take a look at things. It's very objective for me, and it's not like, oh, I've got the answers to the universe now, you know? So.
And you're not like, well, this said this, so nothing else. I won't look at any other evidence, and we're done.
Correct. Exactly. And that's the way that I think all information really needs to be looked at anyway.
Absolutely.
But, anyway.
I agree 100% with that. Well, I have another question that had to do with, and I've always had this question when we talked about either you or Andy mentioned a flu season or a cold season. And maybe you've already asked about this, or maybe you have an idea and we don't need the IDF, I don't know. But why would there even be a season of these things, And is it maybe because it tends to be in the fall and the winter when the energy is sort of, in general, in the world, like declining?
Let me answer this. If we come up with a yes/no question, or if you come up with a yes/no question while I'm talking, just interrupt me and we'll ask it. But my answer, or my thinking around this at present, is because during the fall equinox, from the fall equinox to the spring equinox, the amount of sunlight is less, and therefore people don't have the ability to replicate as much vitamin C, and their psyche is impacted more in a detrimental way. And as we already discussed as a possibility when Dr. Kaufman was on the call, psychological components can and do oftentimes contribute or even exacerbate, or possibly even cause, depending on the nature of the condition, a number of different diseases. And so flu season, it seems like to me, starts right after the fall equinox and goes until spring equinox. So that would be my thoughts on the matter at present.
No, I think that's actually makes perfect sense, and I don't think we need to do IDF on that. And then I don't have any more of my own questions that I developed during our talk today, but I have questions that people submitted to me before, and they didn't necessarily mean for it to be IDF investigation. So I don't know if we want to do IDF on those, or if people in the chat maybe want to suggest things, or if you had another thing.
No, let's just ask some questions. I mean, it's worthwhile. This is really interesting and fun for the posterity, not only of IDF investigations, but also just for the posterity of Rogue Ways and what we're doing. So
I love it. Well, so a lot of people have been wondering about this Kawasaki, allegedly the Kawasaki virus, and maybe you've already done some investigation around this. I'm not sure.
I have not.
Okay, so it's supposedly affecting children, and it's supposedly related to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which was, before this came about, supposedly not affecting children at all. So,
Correct.
so maybe we can even just ask, like, does this Kawasaki illness have a connection to the SARS-CoV-2 illness or something?
Let's ask about direct connection to SARS, SARS, there we go, CoV-2. And let's just see what we come up with. That's in the no range. It's creeping up towards maybe, but it's towards the no range. So,
so they're not, it's not from the same exact source, but maybe they have similar things that sort of affect them both or exacerbate them both or something.
Let's change the word. I think it's actually called disease, not just illness, Kawasaki disease. And let's see if that changes our reading. Even less, yeah. So, you know, one thing that comes to mind is that this could be because kids are inside a lot more and they're not getting outside for recess.
Yeah.
They're not getting, you know, different types of things like that. So let's just see if have a direct connection to being inside more due to quarantine policies.
Okay. Well, then we sort of nailed it. And then I wonder if a component of being inside more, aside from not getting fresh air, sun, you know, movement and mental happiness and all of those things, could it be all of the electronic radiation, EMF sort of poisoning that you get much more of when you're in your house?
Does that look like a decent question? Is Kawasaki disease exacerbated by radiation toxicity due to being inside more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say so.
Oh, that's really sad.
Now, you know, let's see then if this is directly tied into sunlight deficiency. Is Kawasaki disease a disease due to sunlight deficiency? Okay. So now here's the thing that I want to show for myself, and I think that this will be interesting for other listeners too. Does sunlight provide many more nutrients and biosynthesis components besides just vitamin D?
Ooh, good question.
Yes. Okay, so this is exactly what I would have anticipated, in that it does, because Rudolf Steiner talks about this, Paracelsus talks about this, and this would also somewhat corroborate with the concept that we were just talking about flu season and the length of days as well.
Yeah, excellent.
Now, one thing I would like to talk about just really fast that comes to mind is about the different herbs that are considered to be solar herbs in the spagyric pharmacopoeia or spagyric cosmology, and why those are so much more important to take during the winter time. Like, for instance, lemon peel, cinnamon, astragalus, reishi, different types of herbs that have a solar kind of countenance to them are really critically important to take during the winter months, because we are actually taking the amount of sunlight or astral energy that that plant has in relationship to the sun in ways compensating for the lack of sunlight that abounds externally. So the less external sun there is, the more internal sun we need to develop. And what that looks like is actually eating something, putting it inside of your biological unit in order to be able to get that same planetary frequency. Or at least that's one of the theories of spagyric cosmology.
That's awesome. I wonder if we could ask whether or not, because some people are sort of saying or theorizing, and science says all sorts of different things, but that the sun that the sun right now is in like a different phase than normal, or it's got sort of a different well, they're actually saying it's like in quarantine or lockdown, it has less like solar flares or something. So is that true that the sun right now, because what I actually wonder is if the sun is actually in like a much more I don't even know how to phrase it, like it's giving us a lot more than it normally does right now, and that's why they're spraying the skies a lot and keeping us all indoors. They don't want us to get those energies that it might be pumping out more of now than ever.
I have to put a time frame on this, that it has in the past, say, 1,000 years. Let's start there.
Okay.
So the question is the sun actually providing more light or other frequencies now than it has in the past 1,000 years? And I'm starting to take my calibrations. Okay, so it looks like no, but let's change. I won't save that because that's not worthy for me to save.
Yeah.
But let's say 500 years.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And yes. Okay. So one thing that I'd like to bring up is that Frater Albertus wrote a book called Man and the Cycles of the Universe. And in that, he produced a bunch of different astrologically produced charts. There's a booklet that goes along with it, but there's a bunch of different charts that show the different cycles of the universe and how certain themes pervade over and over and over on this planet. And as we approach Aquarius, now by his calculations, we're already in Aquarius. By my calculations, we still have some 130 years or more to go. That being said, when we approach different points like this, the sun and its influence is going to be largely matched by a grander cycle. Now, there's a lot of FE theorists out there, like flat Earth theorists, which I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong. Like I really don't know. I tend to fall into the camp that things are globular, or that there is a curvature model. Crow from Crow 777 and I, we disagree on this, but we agreed to disagree on this.
Right.
Just because I tend to follow a mathematical and geometrical model and have certain points of elucidation that may be difficult to prove aside from just performing mathematics. And a lot of flat Earth theorists out there would say, well, that's just mathematics. How do you know that your mathematics are even a real thing?
Yeah.
Quite literally. For me, geometry is a large portion and part of the basis of all reality. So if something can be proven mathematically, that is actually the universal truth, regardless of the way that we're perceiving it. But that's just my own conclusion from my own experience, and that's neither here nor there. So realistically, the grand solar cycles and the precession of the equinoxes is something that can be calculated regardless of whether we're flat Earth theorists or whether we're, globular model or somewhere in between. And that precession of the equinoxes would indicate that at different times, various planetary rulers would come into play more than others. So in Pisces, we would be working in the 7-planet model, at any rate, of the ancients, we'd be working very heavily with Jupiter, whereas in modern cosmology, we're going to be working with Neptune. And these mean that the solar rays that are reflected off of Neptune and back to us are going to have a greater weight than what they would if we were to say in the age of Aquarius, which is governed over by Saturn. So at least in the 7-planet model, and I'm not sure about the 12-planet model, what they say that Aquarius relates to, maybe Uranus or something, but yeah, traditionally in the 7-planet model, it would relate to Saturn. Saturn deals with the structure of things. And one of the things that I think that most literature agrees upon, now this is getting kind of new agey, but most of the new age or metaphysical or even esoteric literature agrees that the age of Aquarius is going to be a time of profound structure for the human race.
Yeah.
And that the structures that are currently in place during the age of Pisces are going to change very vastly to be much more based in equality and equanimity and thinking about other people and the distribution of resources. And, even though Aquarius is an air sign, it's known as the water bearer, just like clouds or the winds that bring the clouds around that distribute the rain. That is the type of intelligence that I think that we will begin to see within the next maybe 150 to 200 years. And that's just a postulation of mine. Yeah. But that could be part of the reason why the sun isn't providing more light in the last 1,000 years per se, because before Pisces, you have something that was, let's see, before Pisces, you would have Capricorn, and Capricorn is also Saturnian.
Well, that's very
well, and actually, if I go forward, it would have been an Aries, so that would have been a fire sign. That would have been Martial, with the way, because the precession moves backwards through the constellation, whereas the rest of the planets move forwards through the constellation. So yeah, I don't know. I've got some different thoughts on that, but I don't know if they even hold any weight. So
yeah. Well, about the flat Earth thing and whatever, if there's, what did we end up on? 12 different dimensions that were, no, 17.5 different, however many
yeah, 17.3 or something.
Like, I can just imagine that, like, if you're, just like that Flatland sort of video showed, like, if you're at different places viewing things, they're going to appear differently. So, couldn't it be flat at one angle of viewing and globular at another, and or even literally in another dimension, maybe to experience it globularly, then you have to be accessing another dimension of information, or however that works. There could be so many possibilities. No.
Yeah, and it's not even reading at 0.
Oh,
so
wow.
Now I've had Richard Kirby. I hired Richard Kirby to do an analysis on this too, and I showed Crow the results of this, and Crow and I both agreed that because Richard, our old tech, actually input a picture of like a NASA picture of the Earth, that could be a totally fake picture, and that maybe the picture was what was throwing things off. So that's why I just asked this question. So both Richard's data and my data are corroborating right now in terms of IDF analysis. Is the Earth flat? The other question that I had was, if the Earth is flat, how do we explain different seasons in what we currently call the northern and southern hemispheres? So below what is currently called the equator, or even at the equator, there's much different temperature than what there is all year long, FYI, than there is north or south of that. That is perfectly explained geometrically by a globe model. It is not at all explained otherwise. The other thing is about the seasons, because we can explain the seasons based upon the rotation of the Earth and Sun, and that seems to mathematically check out. Again, seems to. I'm not making any arguments that it absolutely does.
Right.
It seems to check out. Whereas with the flat Earth model, the explanation of the seasons is still very unaccounted for. If it has been accounted for or explained intelligibly, I have not yet run across a theory that has tried to do so, or that has done so intelligibly in any sort of scientific or replicable manner. And so, these are just questions that I've asked, and the answer has been in favor still of the globe model. I even asked if the astral plane of the Earth was flat, and so on. In fact, I have to stop screen sharing for just a moment so that I can try and pull this up.
Awesome.
But I can show you the results that Richard Kirby came up with.
that'd be cool. Because there's another idea, that it's the reason why there's so many observations that seem to support the flat Earth conception is because maybe the globeron was actually so much bigger than we are aware of, that it just seems very flat from our observable, as a human on the surface, and how that might look. So, I mean, that could be another aspect as well. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that actually makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
So here were the questions. We opened this up to anybody online through my socials. I can't remember when we performed this, but this was quite some time ago in 2019. It looks like my last edit on this was June 20th, 2019. So it must have been somewhere around there.
Okay.
And we opened this up to anybody on my socials who had any questions about the nature of the Earth, either being flat or round or whatever, any questions that they had, so that we could include it and just try to open it up to the wisdom of the crowd. I'm always very objective in the way that I approach information. And like you, I have absolutely no tie to quote unquote belief systems around the way things are. In fact, I like to regularly break my paradigm daily. If I don't, I consider the day not as much of a success as if I can break a paradigm.
I love that.
So with that being said, we asked, are the stars and constellations vortexing through space besides the sun? The answer was 0. So there are no stars or constellations vortexing through space besides the sun. It means that question is like not even in. Are the planets and stars an Illuminati conspiracy?
No.
0. Did at any time and point the release of water, the firmament was being, see, this is a Richardism where the grammar sucks. The firmament was being a barrier for the cause of the firmament to be destroyed. I don't even know what the hell that means.
I think
1.5.
it's like, there's the idea that there's water above the firmament, and that's why the flood happened, is God or whoever opened the firmament.
That's what I think it's going for, but it's worded so poorly that I have to
okay.
throw that entire answer really out and
Sure.
try and rephrase it again if I wanted to take another calibration. Do any flat Earth theories fully account for the appearance of the stars? One of the things, I've been an astronomer now for a good number of years, and I can show that I can see different faces of different, what we currently call planets, at different times of the year and at different years. You can see different parts of the planet just from here on Earth with my own telescope. And you can draw them and graph them and see that there appears to be some sort of rotation to them, indicating that there might be a North Pole or a South Pole to those planets, in the same way that there's allegedly a North Pole and a South Pole to our planet as well, which suggests it's evidence for a globular theory. So the stars do a very similar thing in that they rotate throughout the year, an astronomical year.
Oh, I see.
And
yeah.
And so if we're seeing different stars at different times, what is causing that if the Earth is flat? If everything else is moving around us, why would they move in the position that they are? And so on and so forth. So do the flat Earth theories account for the appearance of the stars? No. Do any flat Earth theories fully account for other well-known and observable astronomical occurrences? No. Do any flat Earth theories fully account for the orbit of the heavenly spheres? So I even got away from the concept of planets and discussed this the way that Pythagoras would have discussed this well over 2,000 years ago, as heavenly spheres, meaning that with the naked eye, they could also see that they were heavenly spheres, like the music of the spheres, the heavenly spheres, so on and so forth, without any sophisticated equipment, drawing upon our humanity and our history as a human species, not just what we can observe today with modern technology. And again, the answer is no. Do any flat Earth theories fully account for the seasons? No. Do 8 of the visible constellations in the Milky Way galaxy have a measurable and calculable effect on the development of Earth? Yes. Do 10 of them? Also yes. Do 13 of the visible constellations have a measurable and calculable effect on the development of the Earth? Yes. And 12? Also yes. So this indicates that there are at least 13 of them that have a measurable and calculable effect on the Earth. And the reason I asked is that initially there were only 8 constellations. This, we have to go back to Babylonian times. And then we have 10 constellations that showed up in lesser ancient Babylonian Mesopotamian times. They added 2 of them, and then 12 of them suddenly appeared out of that 10, and initially 8. And now we have included Ophiuchus, the 13th constellation as well, which there's a lot of evidence saying that multiple different ancient cultures did as well. So I just wanted to ask all of those, do these constellations have a measurable and calculable effect on the development of the Earth? Because if so, then this goes back to a lot of the same theories behind astronomy, or especially historical astronomy and modern day astrology, that there is something impacting the Earth that is able to be measurable and calculable, that does create substantial change in the organisms around us. Have human beings, and again, this is a Richardism, have human beings left the atmosphere of the Earth? 0.0.
Whoa.
So
they are faking that, perhaps.
This would be corroborating evidence that would say, yeah.
Because that's part
maybe.
of the confusing, you start looking into flat Earth and you're like, I don't know, maybe it's flat, maybe it's not, I'm not sure. But then you look at all the faked, ISS footage and various types of stuff like that. And you're like, well, so that seems to support the idea. But at the same time, this is really interesting because it could be both we're globular and we haven't left still. And does that, and maybe you get to it, but then does that mean that there is sort of like a firmament that we can't go past?
Yeah, see, these are the rabbit holes. Yeah. I'm constantly going down rabbit holes. And this is why when people ask me questions, I usually preface it by saying, I'm really far from the finish line on this one, but based on the data that I have at present, here's what the racetrack looks like. Yeah. So have spacecraft left the atmosphere of the Earth? 97.9. So have human beings left the atmosphere? No. Has spacecraft? Yes. Huh. Have aliens or extraterrestrials entered the atmosphere of the Earth? Yes. Have aliens or extraterrestrials left the atmosphere of the Earth? Yes. So they both entered and left. Have fungi and fungal spores left the atmosphere of the Earth? Yes, which corroborates Paul Stamets' assessments and Terence McKenna's assessments. Cool. How many of the visible constellations in the Milky Way galaxy have a measurable and calculable effect on the development of Earth? That came up at 13. So I don't know that all 13 of the ones that we're using are the ones that are supposed to be there, but it could be considered corroborative evidence at the present moment, even if not proof. Yeah, that's the same question, just repeated twice for some reason. Is it possible to objectively prove that the Earth is flat? No. Is it possible to objectively prove that the Earth isn't flat? 96.7, yes. Is that firmament still in place above the Earth? Now, this is referring to question number 4, I guess, and this is I don't know who asked this, but this was one of those questions. So the firmament is still in place above the Earth. Is the area of outer space that exists between planets a fluid? No. And I know that that's a really big theory for a lot of people, is that space is actually a fluid. Is the area of outer space that exists between planets an actual vacuum? 96.9. So indicates that there is some vacuum kind of thing there. But again, these are just indications. Yeah. Now check it out. These were all my questions about the astral and causal shape of things. Just trying to say, you know what, are people getting the astral plane confused with the actual shape of the Earth? I don't know, but I really stretch my mind here. So is the astral shape of the Earth a cube? No. Is it a dodecahedron? No. Is it a globe or a sphere? Yes. Is it a tetrahedron? No. Icosahedron, octahedron, egg-shaped, elliptical? Is the astral shape of the Earth flat with a domed sky and domed ocean? Is the astral shape of the Earth flat with a domed sky? Is the astral shape of the Earth flat? Is the astral shape of the Earth other than the above shapes, so on and so forth? Is it toroidal? Is it a cube? And now I go into the causal. Is it a cube? Is it a dodecahedron? Is it a globe or a sphere? Again, noticing that the only ones that are popping up really high, I mean, we're not even getting variance of more than 1 point in the rest of these, is the globe or the sphere. And so I ask all of those about the causal shape. Is the Earth stationary while the stars move around us in space? No. Is the moon an alien base? No. Is the moon for the Earth a hologram? No. Is the physical shape of the Earth a cube? No. These are physical shapes. So again, these are my questions. Are they cube, dodecahedron, and again, notice globe or sphere. So this is indicating that the globe or the sphere on the astral, causal, and physical level are all, they're all lining up. They're not giving us different answers or any variance.
Yeah.
Is there a firmament to the planet? Oh, hell yeah. See?
Absolutely. Wow.
Is the universe based on toroidal energy dynamics? No,
Wow.
which I actually went on a Crow episode and mentioned that I think that there are toroids that are very largely involved in universal dynamics. And so I asked that question and the answer was no. And I was like, well,
wow.
okay, unless I can find other corroborative evidence that there is and that this report is wrong, this is corroborative evidence that there isn't. So I have more data that it isn't than I do that it is at the present moment.
I was operating under that, you know, that's not assumption, but that's where I was operating.
Idea,
well.
pretense.
Right.
Was there a time and point when the waters were restored above the firmament as before? Yes. So that means that the waters, I don't know, these are biblical questions that somebody was asking. Was there a time when the firmament released the water it was retaining and that water flooded the earth? Yes. Was there a time when the firmament was a barrier to separate the water above the earth from the water on the earth? And the answer is yes. So that to me indicates that the earth has probably gone through multiple different forms of having different types of waters, and what we determine as a water could be subject to interpretation. At the present moment, I would like to say that waters in the sky would be hydrogen sulfide. If that was creating a firmament that was considered a water, and that as it precipitated out waters on Earth and waters in the sky, that's the difference between hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen dioxide, or H2O2, dihydrogen dioxide, I guess you could call it. So those are the different types of answers that we got just based on the questions that other people were asking and that I was asking. We didn't get a whole lot of input. I'd be willing to do a whole episode on this though, because I think it's stuff that really involves a lot of preponderance and a lot of consideration. And you know, if I know that there's a lot of people that are really, really avid believers, my cousin, my aunt in general, around the flat earth concept, and they have their own reasons for that. And for me, there's more corroborative evidence, both IDF and geometrically, as well as, you know, here's what I have to say about NASA. Anybody who thinks that NASA could be an entire organization around as long as it has without somebody spilling the beans and holding such intense secrets like this, maybe hasn't managed projects. I have managed a lot of different projects in my time, been manager of multiple different teams, and the larger the team gets, the harder it is for cohesiveness or for secrets or for launch date information to stay valid until the launch date. If somebody always spills the beans, usually it's multiple people that end up spilling the beans, and they tell other people. And this is true in just about every sector, whether it's about technology or whether it's about business or management or, you know, HR or anything. There's always things that when you're managing people, keeping a cohesive story or a cohesive routine is very, very difficult. And so I don't see it as being plausible that so many people could be involved in such an elaborate hoax. That being said, it could very well, and this is where I give the benefit of the doubt to a lot of those individuals, could very well be the very same thing that we're experiencing with the realm of viruses, that a lot of people are just operating under a particular pretense and have never really stopped to think and question all of the principles involved. Yeah. So for myself, go ahead.
They might be compartmentalized as well, and so like the little piece they're always working on is like that's all they see, and that part seems fine, and so why ask questions? It's all good. Yeah, exactly. And so that could definitely be a contributing factor to what's going on. I'm not a fan or a non-fan of NASA, so I don't have any particular bias one way or the other. I don't rely on their information for astronomical data. Yeah. There's a peer review group known as the International Astronomical Union, and
folks like myself have equal weight and equal voice within that union as people that have complete large observatories in the desert, and NASA and many other organizations, and we see what we see, and we observe what we observe, and we contribute our findings. And in that way, it's much more grassroots than what people would think. And the majority of us all agree that astronomically, it appears as if the Earth is globular in such a way that it can be observed simply by looking at the sky and our frame of reference point and how that changes. But again, my viewpoints are neither here nor there. And, you know, I've turned a lot of people off by talking about this in the past, and hopefully I don't turn people off. They just realize that I'm open to lots of different answers. I just need something that's actually substantial, not just what we call jacking off, just asking questions, or JAQs. And which is to say, if you just ask a question that doesn't ever have an answer, like, well, why has it never been proven that blah, 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 blah? That's not evidence, actually, and that's not proof. And so that ends up being just really hollow and making the person asking those questions look really silly if they're not actually trying to find their own answer for it. Asking a question is designed for a person to ultimately find their own answer. And if they're not, then that's a very lazy approach to trying to come up with some sort of proof or data.
Or an answer, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we should start to shut things down, but I hope, can I ask one more IDF question?
Oh yeah, let's do.
Okay. Because the aliens question fascinates me, because I've had a lot of seeming interaction from things that people would call aliens, but my understanding is that they're not physical beings. And so I wonder, it said, you know, that aliens did come through our atmosphere to Earth. Are they physical then? Is it a physical entity coming through?
Are all extraterrestrials physical entities? Does that sound like an okay way of wording that?
Yes. Can we say, so absolutely not. Can we say are most or any?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and save that answer. That's significant and interesting for my research. And let's do our, do you want to say any or some?
Can we do both?
Okay, let's do are any. Okay, 100%, yes. And
could we say what percent are physical?
Yeah, what percent of extraterrestrials that have entered Earth's atmosphere, since that's the way, that's the data that we're going on, is about atmosphere, are physical entities. Does that sound like a good way of wording that?
Yes, but Earth is missing its R, if that matters.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of important. We don't know what the hell the ETH is.
Yeah.
So, okay, and we're just going to take our calibration now. About 58.
Wow, so there's both. I don't know why that's one of the few things in my mind I think I had an either or attitude about. I was like, they're either physical or they're not, but I guess they're... why would I assume that? You know, that was silly.
Well, you know, if you look into some of the ancient histories around Atlantis and where the Bermuda Triangle exists, and the concept that there were counter-rotating star tetrahedrons that were counter-rotating, and that this is what ultimately created the Great Flood that flooded out Atlantis and a number of other different civilizations. One of the concepts, or one of the theories behind this, is that multiple different types of entities from all sorts of different dimensions suddenly gained a portal to access our Earth. And in the same way that we, as entities, as human entities, feast upon, say, honey or vegetables or even meats and different types of things like that, there are multiple different types of entities that feast upon our emotional energy or that feast upon other things. Did they come from other planets that are maybe non-physical? These are ideas that enter into my head saying that, oh yeah, there could definitely be quote unquote extraterrestrials that come from planets or planes that have absolutely nothing to do with physical reality, and that they're here feeding just on an emotional level or on an intellectual level, feeding off of our ideas, things like that.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then I wonder if that's what was sort of referred to in the the angels falling from heaven, or those types of concepts too.
I know the questions you could ask, as long as they're like yes, no, or percentages, or like calibration questions, that it's limitless, and you could waste your entire life asking questions like this.
Yeah,
and
I really could.
That's why it has to be poignant in so many cases for research. Otherwise, it takes these huge tangents and goes off the rails.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic episode. I'm really excited for your return on July 7th.
Yeah, July 7th.
At 7th month. So we're excited about that. That's going to be awesome.
Yes.
And I invite everyone back to that. And then I would like you, as always, to share where people can contact you. If you have other things coming up that you're excited to share with people, or anything else you want people to know about.
Cool. Yeah. First thing is I'm taking pretty much the entire month of June off. We have a very large and growing wait list for IDF wellness services. But if you're interested in that, we do have an intake form. We just, have you fill out a little form on my website at phoenixaurelius.org. That's PhoenixAurelius.org. And you go to I think the wellness tab, or IDF investigation. I don't actually remember what it is off the top of my head, but you'll be able to see it because it'll say something like IDF research or wellness research, and you'll go to that tab, and there's a form there that you can fill out that has all of the data that you need to put in to be considered to be an eligible candidate for our IDF analysis and research program. In the meantime, I make and compose a tremendous amount of spagyric remedies and medicines here in my laboratory. 100% of the materials that we use are biodynamic, organic, or wild crafted, even down to our ethanol, which is a certified organic cane ethanol that we use in our laboratory. And I've just got a lot of things going on. So the best way of doing that is signing up for my newsletter, finding out what I'm doing. But I am taking most of the month of June off. I've been working 14 to 16-hour days straight since January. And that was kind of making up for time that I was down last year after having a brain aneurysm. And so, and healing up from that using IDF technology and blah, blah, blah. And so I've just been pretty much nonstop going at it for 3 years. So I'll be taking most of June off. I won't be available for a whole lot of email questions or other things like that. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't email us. I still do have email staff who will be responding to questions, but if you have things particularly from me, they're not going to get to me until July. And I'm just trying to take it one step at a time. I got to take care of myself so I can take care of other things, you know what I mean? So
absolutely, we want you healthy and well so we can continue to share in all the goodness that you bring.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I want myself healthy and well too. That's my main prerogative. It does no good to keep everybody else healthy and well and not be a sterling example of my own, what I preach. So
sure. I love it. Well, what are your sort of final thoughts or ideas or words of wisdom that you want to leave people with?
Well, as per usual, I like to say don't be rigid in your beliefs and things. But I think if anything, tonight's session, tonight's call teaches us that there are so many different spectrums beyond just black, white, and gray, and all of the different shades of those. There's an entire spectrum of colors. And beyond those, there's probably colors that we're not even aware of or can't even see. And so just always reach for the beyond, always go for what is possibly out there, and try and continue to stay as open as you possibly can to new ideas and to new information, because this is what's going to allow us to grow. And then just simply compare and contrast your ideas with other ideas, because this is where we all grow. If it wasn't for me trying to meet Andy's challenge of trying to provide peer-reviewed literature, there's a good chance that I would still say, oh yeah, no, viruses do appear to be composed of RNA and DNA and blah, 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 blah. With a simple phone call and being able to go through some things in depth, able to change my mind lickety split. And that led to a whole new set of research and a whole new set of ideas, especially if people have come in on some of my other episodes that we've done on this very same channel on Rogue Ways. They'll see like, oh, wow, like his views are definitely shifting or changing or morphing based on the information. So, you know, I just would suggest that other people try and do a similar thing, because it creates more space for conversation and for collaboration. And at the end of the day, that's what we all need. We need more connection in our lives. And this is a viable way of doing it.
That's excellent. I love it. And I love how you phrased it earlier as like, if you're not breaking a paradigm a day, then you're kind of like doing it wrong. And I think it's cool. It's a good example to lead by, because I think a lot of people, you know, if they weren't already familiar with your genius, I think in this episode, a lot of people are like, holy crap, who is this guy? He's amazing. And it's like, if someone like you, who's this learned and this, you know, thoughtful, is still, you know, adapting your ideas to fit the evidence that you find, that is kind of the best, you know, example that people can have to follow. Because I think we get the idea that somehow you learn a lot and now you're done, now you know everything, and so you're the expert and it's over. And it's like, no, we should be, you know, always continuously growing and adapting to whatever we find. Absolutely.
Yeah. If people think that, yeah, I think that was a very generous assessment, but if they thought that I was a genius or amazing, yeah, just follow in the wake of people that you admire or want to be like, and do the behaviors and patterns and things that they do, and then you'll achieve similar results, but in your own way. Absolutely. And so, yeah.
Perfect. Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Dr. Andy Kaufman, who has left us early but was an awesome part of this show, and according to our master spagyricist and Paraclesian alchemist, Phoenix Aurelius. Phoenix, thanks for coming back, and I'm so excited for you to return again.
Excellent. Thank you. Me too. Thank you so much for hosting this.
Awesome. Well, together we exist as nodes in a network that is ever expanding. Not a single one of us lacks a role to play. Your energy can diminish, darken, and lack, and you can sink into the muck of the anti-net of illness. And there you will be part of building what can only be built in such a space: destruction. Or your energy can grow and brighten and surge, and you can uplift into the clear air of all that is good, true, and beautiful to help construct the pure grid of life-affirming wellness. And it all happens by the simplicity of your thoughts, words, and actions. Your choice is all that stands between the abyss and the heavens. No other power like it exists. You are everything that matters, and I cannot wait until 100 million points of light become a glorious matrix of illumination where no darkness can dare penetrate again, and until you choose goodness and truth so many times that the abyss lays forever behind you. Travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak, while the tongue beats a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies, disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God was booed is sorcery. To recreate the God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Pinio. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me, yo?
From the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional 3 ain't meeting me on top of the 4th. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to to squab with a sword, forged with ink drizzle, branched out, try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter, that they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they under over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo. Bioengineered morsels, conversing with machine elves. Bypassing maggots, they stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the backs of the savage. Them clasp hands at the Sabbath. Smack of energy damage, they done twisted the tongues. Put nanotech in the lungs, the awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking
run.